Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome to the Midlife Revolution. I'm your host, Megan Connor, and today I am joined by one of the most fantastic people on the entire planet, my oldest daughter, Emmy.
Hello.
Emmy is short for Megan Elizabeth. We've called you Emmy your whole life. And there were even people that knew you for 20 years before they knew that your real name was Megan.
True story.
Yeah. So I brought Emmy on today because among the many things that we could discuss between the two of us that I think would be very entertaining, you served an LDS mission after high school, and I wanted you to talk about your experiences on the mission and shed some light for people about what it's really like to serve a mission and how they should react to Mormon missionaries when they see them out there in the world. So thanks for being here today.
You're welcome.
What
Anytime.
do you want to tell us about yourself before we get started, the people who don't know you?
I live in California with my husband and my little boy.
Who is
And
adorable.
yes, he just started preschool, which is very exciting for us. I am neurodivergent. I have a lot of crafty hobbies, and I'm currently staying home with my little guy, so not working outside the home right now, but who knows, in the future that may change. And I'm trained as a birth doula, so I have a background in birth work.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
You also are just, I don't know, when I think about who you are as a person, I think you're super creative and you are always just well put together. You have just
That's
an
nice.
aesthetic about you. I mean, even when your hair is just up in a bun or whatever, you just always have a way of coordinating your clothes and textures and colors and makeup and all of that stuff.
Thanks, Mom. That's nice.
You're good at that stuff.
Sometimes when people ask me like what I do, I tell them that I'm a fiber artist because I feel like that kind of is a good umbrella for all the things that I enjoy doing. But, I have one of those like chronic how hard could it be genes where if there's something I want to do, I'm just like, well, how hard could that be? I'll try it.
Yes, Emmy is an excellent seamstress. She makes quilts and clothes, and she's considering opening a business. So I'm pretty excited about that. I think it's going to be super cool.
It's a big dream.
Yeah. Well, just to get started, so let's give the people a little context. You graduated high school in 2013, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that was right about the time that they lowered the missionary age for sister missionaries from 21 to 19.
Yes.
And so you were 18 when you graduated from high school. And so that meant that I think they made that announcement in the spring of 2013, if I remember correctly, at that conference, at General Conference.
I think it was either that spring or the previous fall in 2012, because I remember receiving a text from my seminary teacher at that time, and she was very excited for all of the kids in our seminary class that could basically go on a mission right after high school if we wanted to, because the age was also lowered for young men from 19 to 18.
Yeah, so it was a year earlier for men and 2 years earlier for women. And I do remember, I think maybe you are right about it being the fall. So that meant that when you graduated from high school, you could start the process right away of putting in your mission papers.
Right. I didn't, but yes, I could have.
You could have, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk a little bit about your excitement about the mission? Like, did it change? Did you want to go on a mission before the age change? Once the age change got announced, did that make you want to go more or sooner? Or what were your thoughts about the mission before the age change and then after it happened?
I had never really considered going on a mission ever, because 21 felt really old to me. And I was hoping that I would either be like in college and like already a few years into college by that time, or married, or, so a mission was never really on my radar um, until they lowered the age. And then I kind of thought about it because so many people were excited, now this is an option for you. Maybe you could do it. But honestly, at that time in my life, as an older teenager, I wasn't really super, I don't know, spiritually or emotionally invested in church. I don't know. I think I was attending church at that time because I knew it made you happy, and it was kind of like a habit, like this is just what we do on Sundays kind of thing, but I wouldn't say that I was, I don't know, like into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, which kind of
So,
surprises me to hear because up to that point, you did all the things. You were involved
mhm.
in everything church-wise. You were very active. You went to every activity. You brought your friends to church. Several of your friends got baptized in high school because of your missionary efforts, just bringing them to
Yeah,
church and sharing the gospel with them.
I think it was mostly that other people expected me to be active and to do all the things. So,
Hmm.
and it wasn't just you, it was like, my grandparents, my young women's leaders, everybody kind of looked at me as the eldest of six as this, you have to be the example for your younger siblings. And also, there weren't very many teenagers or youth my age in our ward, in our congregation. So a lot of times I brought my friends just because I wanted to hang out with my friends. And they're, you expected me to go to youth group on Wednesday nights and all these activities and stuff. And so I was like, well, I may as well just bring a friend kind of thing. And it's interesting because I had a lot of friends that were much more like monetarily wealthy than I was, but I felt like most of them didn't really have like a spiritual background or a lot of emotional support at home. So they saw our family and the church as kind of this like really, you know, spiritual, uplifting place. It was like a gap in their lives that they didn't have, so they enjoyed coming with me. I never really like pushed my friends to join the church. It was just like, this is what I'm doing, so if you want to be a part of my life. And I spent so much of my time volunteering at church and going to the, youth activities and all that stuff, that it was like, if you want to spend time with me, this is what I'm doing. So come along, kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, so Emmy portaled into a different dimension so that we could improve the sound quality a little bit.
Yes.
So that's
The
why she looks
visual
different
quality
now.
isn't as good, but the sound quality is better. So
Yeah, you don't get that golden hour light on your face, but you still look
know.
beautiful.
Thanks.
Okay, so we were talking about you inviting your friends to church with you, and several of them got baptized while you were in high school. And so it was kind of surprising to me to hear that you hadn't really thought about going on a mission before.
Yeah, I think I brought my friends with me to church because I wanted to hang out with my friends, and they enjoyed it. They enjoyed spending time with me. So
Yeah.
I think for some of them, it filled a gap that they didn't have in their lives because some of them weren't religious at all.
Yeah.
So I think I mostly attended church at that time in my life because everybody expected me to, including you.
Yeah.
And also at that time, Connor and Cassie were already like one foot out the door, if not out already.
Out of the church.
Out of the church. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I felt like I didn't want to be another one of your kids that was disappointing you in that way, I guess, so.
I hate that because it wasn't, it wasn't that for me. It wasn't a disappointment in the way that like I was disappointed in the kids who chose to leave.
Mm-hmm.
It was sort of just a continuation of being in the limbo state of not being married to somebody who was a member and not being married in the temple. Because in Mormonism, when you're not married in the temple, you're not sealed to your children. And so I never felt as though our family was like complete. And I also didn't feel when kids started to leave the church, I didn't feel any sort of angst about that spiritually, because I was like, well, we were never sealed anyway. And I feel like God will just take care of it. It's like, there's nothing I can do about it, And I wasn't disappointed either in saying like, oh, I'm so disappointed in, X kid for leaving the church. That makes me think less of them. It really was more just like, especially with Connor, because he always was his own person anyway. He's so different from me and from the rest of you guys that it was like, this is who he is. Like, he's an individual person. And there were so many things that I loved about him, and still do, obviously, so many great characteristics that each of you have, that to me, leaving the church was like a part of your personal journey. And there was also sort of like the Mormon part of me that was like, I did absolutely everything that I could to raise my kids in the church and teach them the gospel. And I know that that foundation is going to be good enough of a spiritual foundation that God will take care of it after this life is over. I was really faithful about reading scriptures with you guys and trying to have family home evening as much as we could, and taking you to church every single Sunday. And even when I was out of town or sick, I would get you guys a ride to church and make sure that you went. So I felt like I had done everything I could for you spiritually, and the rest was up to you guys,
You hear that phrase in the church a lot, the teach them correct principles and then let them govern themselves kind of thing, which honestly is not a bad philosophy to have as a parent.
Yeah.
So that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And the other one was raise them up in the ways of the Lord, and they will not depart from it. That Bible, that Bible verse. So those kind of things brought me comfort. And also, I had been so judged and so shamed by my parents when I didn't do things exactly right, that I never wanted to treat you guys that way. So I had this view of you as individuals apart from me, and your choices didn't reflect on me. And so I loved you no matter what, kind of thing.
Yeah. And I definitely didn't think that you would not love me or think less of me for not attending church anymore. I think it was partially that this is just what you do. Like, I didn't really know any other way, because that was our community and that was where we spent so much of our time and we were so invested in it. So I think I attended because of that, but also because obviously I love you and you're my mom and I respect you. And, I could see that through a lot of adversity and things that happened in our life while I was growing up, the church was very much like a rock for you and a place where you could find solace and community and those things. And so I think in a way, I don't know that I ever would have put this together as a teenager, but looking back now, I think some part of me recognized that those were things I wanted in my life too. So even if I wasn't like super gung-ho on the gospel, I think I stayed in the church as long as I did because of the community aspect and because of the tradition. This is our faith tradition in our family. This is what we do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what was it that made you finally choose to serve a mission?
That is a long story. But basically, to give you the Spark Notes version, at that time in my life, so I graduated high school in 2013, and then all of my friends pretty much went away to college, either out of state or far enough away that I wasn't seeing all of my friends anymore, like day to day. So I started working. I mean, I had been working through my senior year and stuff, but I was still living at home, and then I was working for several months, and it was the kind of thing where I would just like save up enough money to go travel somewhere, and then I would come back home and save up enough money to go somewhere else and then come back home. So I didn't really have a plan for going to school. There was nothing that I was particularly passionate about studying in like a college setting. And also, like, we didn't have the money to send me to college, so I knew that if I was going to go to college, I would need to apply for student aid. I would need to pay for it myself. And that wasn't something that I was prepared to invest in at that time. So I was just kind of like floating, I guess, working, dating. I got involved with some different boyfriends that were really not good for me. But there was a point in the spring of 2014 where I was working a job early mornings at a bakery. So I would get there at like 2 a.m. and work until 8 a.m. And then I would leave that job, come home, shower, get dressed, and go to my other job, waiting tables and working the lunch shift at this little bistro by our house. And then I would get off of that job at 3 p.m. and go home, or, whatever. Like, I was just in the grind. I was working so much. And I just felt like I didn't really have a path or a purpose. But a friend of yours, I think, or somebody that you knew through a mutual acquaintance, was talking about hiring an au pair for a family that lived in France. And so we talked about that, and I got in touch with that family and thought, what a cool thing for me to do. Like, I don't have a plan right now. I could move to France. I could study French, be a nanny for this family. So I started getting the paperwork together to do that. And at that time in my life, I wouldn't say that I was particularly devout as far as church went, but I knew that a big decision like that was something that I probably should pray about, because I would be uprooting my whole life and moving to another country where I didn't speak the language and I didn't have a community. I would pray about it over the course of several weeks, like whenever I would remember to say my prayers at night, I would just be like, Heavenly Father, please tell me if it's a good idea for me to go to France, like in my nightly prayers or whatever. And I never received an answer to those prayers. And I remember feeling very frustrated by that. And it was like, they asked for, I had to get a passport. They asked for like my school transcripts from my French class, like all this stuff that I had to get together for them. And I was emailing back and forth. And I just still was like kind of on the fence about it. I'm not really sure if I should go. It seems like it would be really fun, but I wanted that yes. I wanted that feeling that everybody talked about at church, where like you just know that it's the right thing and whatever. And I just never got that. And so I remember being very frustrated, and I came home one night super late from some party or something, and I was just feeling like, I remember being really angry at God and being like, just tell me what the right thing to do is. I don't care what it is. If I'm supposed to go to France, I'll go to France. If I'm not supposed to go to France, please tell me that. I just want to do what you want me to do, is what I said in that prayer. And then the following week or the next day, I can't remember exactly the timing of it, this woman in our ward, in our congregation, texted me. I guess you had given her my number because she needed a babysitter. And so that was how Amanda entered my life. I got to know Amanda. She had 4 kids. She needed help with them because her husband, I think, was deployed at the time. And so she hired me to babysit for her a few times, and we got to know each other. And her family was like the perfect Mormon family. It was like they got married in the temple. Both her and her husband had served missions. They were raising these 4 kids in the gospel. They both came from very devout families. So they had a lot of extended family that were members. And it was like the first time in my life where I had seen a family up close like that, because when you're working as a nanny for somebody, you get to know their family very intimately. Right. For better or for worse. So I was, in their home every single day, and I saw the gospel, like this whole message that the church teaches, working for a family. And I was like, wow, this is amazing, because growing up, Dad wasn't active. And so it always kind of felt like our family was on the outs of our church community. Yeah. And even though we attended and we did all the right things, Dad didn't attend with us. And that was a huge hole, in our whole thing. So I was at Amanda's house all the time. We got to talking a bunch because Amanda's really great at asking people personal questions, which I love that about her. She's very direct and very blunt. Yeah. And I remember her asking me one time, like, what are you doing with your life right now? Like, why aren't you in school? Why aren't you, like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know, and she and I had a lot of similar interests, and we became really good friends. And she was honestly kind of like an older sister to me. I think she was in her she was like a young 30 something at that time, so she kind of pushed me and encouraged me to like have some kind of plan. And then one day I was at her house and she was like, why don't you go on a mission? Like, have you ever thought about going on a mission? And I was like, no, not really. Because at that time in my life, I wasn't considered worthy to go. Like I had had premarital sex. I was like dating. I was drinking. I was like doing all the things you're not supposed to do as a young, church member.
Yeah.
And like those things would have prevented me from getting a temple recommend and prevented me from being worthy to go on a mission. So I was like, even if I wanted to, they wouldn't let me go. I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she was like, well, and this story is so crazy to me now, like hearing myself say it out loud. She was like, my dad called me the other day, and Amanda's dad is very much like the patriarch of their family. He's like, he presides over everybody spiritually. He often gives...
Even like the adult children. I just want to point out that all of his children are grown. Yes. They're adults. They have their own lives, but he was very much controlling everything that they did.
I wouldn't say controlling, but
or
he's
presiding
like
over
presiding over them,
advising.
Yes.
And
all his kids. I mean, I love Simon too. All of his kids love him. They all look to him for advice, whether it's spiritual, financial. I mean, like he's a great dad, and so. She said, well, my dad called me the other day and told me that he had a dream or some kind of, spiritual experience where he felt like there's a young woman in your ward that needs to go on a mission. I'm going to pay for her to be your nanny so that she can earn the money to go on a mission. I don't know who it is. I'm sure you know who this person is. But as soon as you figure that out, let me know. Mom and I will pay her to be your nanny full time so that she can earn her money for her mission. And so Amanda told me this. And I remember like very vividly, I was sitting at a stool on her kitchen counter. And as soon as those words came out of her mouth, I just had this crazy, like eye-opening spiritual experience where I felt like this is the answer to my prayer. This is what God wants me to do. He's created a way for me to do it, because also missions are a huge financial commitment as well. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to pay for it. Even if I did want to go, or even if they would let me go, I wouldn't be able to pay for it either. So it kind of just felt like one of those moments where all the puzzle pieces start to fall into place. And I truly, really deeply felt like God is aware of me. He's placed these people in my life to help me do this. This is what he wants me to do. It felt very right to me. I was bawling, crying. I was just like so overwhelmed by the Spirit and just had all these warm feelings. Like that feeling that I kept waiting for, that was the feeling. Was like, I need to go. I have to go. This is my confirmation from God that this is what I'm supposed to do with my life.
Yeah. I remember you talking about this at the time, and I remember thinking, what a blessing it was that you had Amanda in your life and that she was a good mentor to you, and how generous it was of Simon to basically pay you to be his daughter's nanny. Mm-hmm. Looking back on it now, well, the thing that always kind of bothered me is that after the fact, once you did go on your mission, and even after you came home, and then when you got married and everything, Amanda would always say, like, it was, quote, Amanda saying, I single-handedly got Emmy on her mission.
Yes.
I remember her saying that. She took all the credit for that, which when you tell this story, yeah, that's a big deal, for all of those circumstances to come together so that you could do that. And she did mentor you through that, and she did suggest it, and she was the advocate of it. But I always felt really angry whenever she said that, because I was like, this is my daughter who I raised. and almost single-handedly, because Dad wasn't super involved, you know.
I would say
And,
single-handedly, yes.
you know, I'm the one who, you know, gave her a spiritual foundation and nurtured her through the gospel and all of that stuff. And so, but that, I didn't get any credit for that because she was the one who got you over the finish line, you know.
I guess so, yeah. And I actually have talked to her about that since then and let her know that I was the one that got me on my mission.
Yeah,
I was the one that made the sacrifices. I was the one that had to pull my life together to be worthy to go, to be financially ready to go. And Amanda did hold my hand through a lot of those things. She helped me get my papers in. She helped me kind of figure out my finances because I didn't know anything about money. I mean, like, we didn't have any, you know, so as soon as I would earn money, I would spend it on whatever it was I needed at the time. And so she helped me figure out a plan for saving the money. I had to get my wisdom teeth removed. I had to do all these things spiritually to prepare or whatever. And at that time, you were teaching full time. Yeah. And you weren't super available to help me with that stuff. So, and I was with Amanda for like 10 to 12 hours a day. Like I wasn't just the nanny, like 9 to 5. Like I would get there right before her kids, like I would get her kids ready for school. I would take them to school, come back to her house, take care of the baby. We would do all the meal prep and all that stuff. And I wasn't leaving her house until like 10 p.m. So I was there for really long days. And they paid me well for it. And they were really great. And I would never be anybody else's nanny. I've quickly learned that their family just meshed well with me, but I'm not a good nanny to other people.
Yeah. And also I wasn't just teaching full-time, I was teaching choir full-time. Yes. And so I had before school rehearsals and after school rehearsals. And then on the weekends I was judging competitions. And then we also had concerts to prepare for and competitions. And so it was like being a teacher and then also running a major club or a sports program or something as well.
And you had 5 other kids.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
and at the time, so this was 2015, right?
14. It was the spring of 2014. Spring and summer.
And so at this time, Felicia, my youngest, was 3 years old. And
I remember taking her to preschool in my little Firebird. I would put her car seat in the back of my crappy car.
So she was in preschool. Lucas was in elementary school. Rachel and Cassie were in middle school. And Connor was in high school, and you had just graduated.
And Connor was having a lot of problems in school and with his friend group and all of that stuff.
Yeah, too. And he ended up graduating early, moving out early. And so by this time, I think this might have been the period of time where Connor didn't talk to us for like 18 months. I didn't even know where he was living.
Right.
So
pretty
this
much
was
the whole time I was on my mission.
Yeah, it was a really busy, crazy time. And I also had recently gone no contact with mom and dad, my mom and dad.
Yes.
So Grammy and Papa to you. So I didn't have a lot of support outside. Anyway, so this was a crazy time for our family. And I felt like you going on a mission was a huge blessing. And this is also what everybody in the ward told me too. And what my parents told me too, was that like Emmy going on a mission is going to bless your life so much that it was like people implied that everything that's tumultuous about your life right now is going to be fixed because your daughter's on a mission.
I remember them telling me those things too. Your family will be blessed. And this is a piece that we haven't talked about yet, but my patriarchal blessing, which I don't really know how to explain that to somebody that's never been Mormon, but it's basically like, I don't even know how patriarchs are appointed. Is that by the stake president? I don't know.
So patriarchs are called, and it's like a lifelong calling. Once you get called as a patriarch, you're a patriarch until you die. And I think they have to be appointed by an area president. I don't know for sure if that's the case, but anyway, the patriarch is in charge of giving blessings to each of the, the young people. And the idea is you're supposed to get your patriarchal blessing as early in life as you can, because it's supposed to be a guide for what you're going to do with the rest of your life. A lot of patriarchal blessings talk about what kind of a career that you'll have, like in vague terms, like it'll say something like you're going to spend your life helping people with their health, and then somebody will go and get a nursing degree because of that,
Yes.
So it's sort of like a fortune. It's sort of like a fortune.
It kind
almost.
of is, honestly. And I can't remember exactly. I think I got my patriarchal blessing maybe my senior year of high school, because even though they want you to get it as early as you can, they also want you to be like spiritually prepared to receive your patriarchal
and
blessing. worthy and all that stuff. So I think I got it maybe my junior or senior year of high school. And usually they're just like 2 or 3 paragraphs long. Some of them are very short, maybe 1 paragraph. My patriarchal blessing was 4 pages long.
Yeah.
It was extremely long. I've never met anybody else who has a blessing that long.
Was it Hassel that gave you yours?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And one of the lines in my patriarchal blessing was, your mission will introduce you to foreign lands and places. And at that time, I was not planning on serving a mission. So again, when I had this spiritual experience with Amanda, I was like, oh, this makes sense now. I am going to go on a mission. And I was convinced that I was going to get called to like Germany or, someplace foreign because of my patriarchal blessing.
And there was also an implication that Dad would come back to church if you went on your mission. That
well,
your
not
faithful
Dad
service.
specifically. It was that I would be the example and I would bring my family back into the gospel. It was a lot of pressure. I remember feeling a lot of pressure. Like, I'm the one, I have to be the golden child. I'm the one that has to go on a mission, get married in the temple, marry a worthy priesthood holder that can preside over my family because my dad's not doing it. So I felt an extreme amount of pressure and responsibility. I guess maybe pressure, yes, but it was mostly responsibility. Like, I'm going to be the one that's going to set the example for my siblings spiritually so that they can have somebody to look to. Like, my family is going to be the one where the gospel works, And I remember all growing up when they would talk about like eternal families and the gospel blesses families. And like you mentioned, feeling like, well, we're not sealed together and feeling that kind of on the outs. I was always told by like priesthood leaders and young women's leaders that if that's not the case in my family of origin, that's the family that I will get to create for myself. Right. I will get married in the temple. I will be sealed to my children, Yeah. So that was like a big deal to work towards.
And it's such a huge amount of pressure for a young person. And also, you're the oldest sibling. So there was already that sort of birth order pressure on you to be an example, to be a hard worker, to be the oldest kid. I remember having to tell you so often, just go be a kid, because I think you felt this responsibility towards your siblings. If they weren't behaving or if they weren't getting ready fast enough or any of that, you would always step in and want to do that. And I appreciated your help so much. But at the same time, I had to always remind you, like, I've got this. It's okay. Go take care of your own stuff. I know that didn't happen as often as it could or should have if Dad had also helped out. But you're already the oldest child. For better or for worse, you were parentified, not because I told you that you had to be in charge of kids, because you felt that pressure yourself.
Yes.
And now you're going on a mission. Your dad and your 2 closest siblings have already left the church. And you feel this huge pressure to be the one to set the spiritual example, because if you don't, then they're not coming back to church. Is that what you felt? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of felt like maybe my example will bring Dad back to church, but it was mostly for my siblings. I just wanted them, because honestly, at that time, I wanted everybody to feel the way that I felt. And I remember Tommy talking about this when you interviewed him as well. Like, when you're so entrenched in the gospel and you start feeling all those good feelings and this, the gospel blesses families and all that great stuff, there really is this desire to just share it with people and just for them to be as happy as you are and to feel as much peace as you feel and all that stuff. And so I just remember like looking at Connor and all the problems that he was going through. And, Cassie was still a young teen. Like, I think it was maybe her freshman year of high school or something like that, or sophomore year. I can't remember. But I just remember feeling like there's still time for them. Like,
Yeah.
But with Dad, it was kind of like he's been a lost cause since I can remember, like, and like maybe he'll come back to church and maybe my parents will get sealed in the temple, and how wonderful would that be? But I never really felt like it was my responsibility to fix like you and Dad. It was
That's
mostly it was mostly about being an example to my siblings.
Yeah, that's so important. So when you put your papers in, we waited, and then you got your mission call. It came in the mail, and you were where were you at this point?
I was in Santa Barbara with Amanda's family.
Okay.
So
yeah, that's right.
For the time that I was nannying for Amanda, and I did this both before and after my mission, her family spends a really good chunk of time in Southern California every summer. So I went with them to Southern California. And because of all of the worthiness stuff that the hoops I had to jump through in order to get a temple recommend and all that stuff, they told me that my papers needed to be approved by the First Presidency, like personally. Wow. So there are several levels. If you want to go on a mission, you first have to meet with your local leader, who's your bishop. Then you have to meet with your stake president, who presides over several congregations. So once you get through those 2 interviews, usually your papers will go to the missionary department in Salt Lake, and they will assign you a mission call, a place to go. But for the problem children like me, or like people that have special circumstances or whatever, you have to get special approval from the prophet and his 2 apostles, from the First Presidency directly. And so I was told, again, because I had premarital sex and all these things,
which is the sin next to murder.
Yes. And I had word of wisdom issues. Like, I was drinking and smoking pot and whatever else. They told me that it wasn't enough for me to just get approved by the missionary department. I also had to go through the First Presidency. And this is what my stake president told me. So when you put your papers in, it's usually at that time, the mission calls were coming, between 10 days and 2 weeks. And he said, I'm not sure how long it's going to take for your papers to get approved. It could be days, it could be months. We don't know. So I'll let you know when I hear anything. So I went to California with Amanda's family for several weeks, and my mission call came during that time. So I read it on my phone over Zoom with everybody. Usually in the Mormon church, you would have like a big party and people would come over and, everyone guesses where you're going to go. And it's like a big deal to read your mission call in front of all these people that are supporting you. But because I was out of town and I wanted to know where I was going, I read my mission call as soon as it came.
So did they send you an email? Because I remember getting a package in the mail and you wanted me to hold it for you. Because I wasn't allowed to look at it before you read it. Anyway.
Now, if you're going on a mission now, all the calls are digital. They don't do like packets anymore. But at that time, I don't think they were
emailing.
They weren't emailing them out yet. So I think
we did get a physical
somebody
package.
took a picture of it and sent it to me to read.
Yeah.
Whether it was a text or an email.
Yeah, vaguely familiar to me. So I want to pause your story just for a second, because I want people to know that we've talked so much on my channel about Visions of Glory, the horrible, harmful book that Lori used for her Bible, basically. And it was written by Tom Harrison, who was Spencer in the book. Those were his experiences, his near-death experiences, quote unquote. And he is one of the people, or he's in charge of the people, or he is the person that evaluates missionary packets to determine whether the missionary in your circumstance is mentally fit to serve a mission.
Interesting.
So the man who wrote that horrible, harmful book is the one in Salt Lake who would have received your mission packet and reviewed the materials, because he is a licensed mental health professional and he works for the church. And so he would have reviewed your materials and made a determination whether or not you were mentally well enough to go on your mission.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
I don't know if he was the exact guy at the exact time that you went, but that is one of the things he does right now. And I think it's kind of scary to think about. So anyway, so you received your mission call. You read it over Zoom, and tell us how you felt about that.
Well, it came a lot sooner than we were planning, than we thought it would come.
Yeah.
And which I took as a sign, like I'm supposed to go. This is the time that I'm supposed to go. Obviously, the Lord has a plan and he's preparing the people where I'm supposed to be or whatever. So the call came very soon and I read it and it said Santa Rosa, California. And I was at the time in Santa Barbara. So I was thinking, where is that? Like, where is Santa Rosa? I've never heard of Santa Rosa before. It's north of the San Francisco Bay. And that mission includes Marin County, which is like Sausalito, Tiburon, all of that stuff that's north of the Golden Gate Bridge, where the wealthy 1% live, all the way up to the Oregon coast. And it's like, if you cut California in half lengthwise, it's everything on the west coastal side. And then as far east as Davis, which I didn't know where any of those places were at the time, but actually now I live here. I live in the Sacramento area. So it's weird to be back, but that was where my mission call was, to to Santa Rosa. And I think at this time it was either late July or early August, and they asked me to report September 14th to the MTC in Provo.
Yeah.
So I felt like I had very little time to prepare, but I was going stateside, which was bewildering to me because I thought that I was supposed to go to a foreign land or place, and I was English speaking. So sometimes they'll call you to a mission like that within the United States, but they'll ask you to learn Spanish, or they'll ask you to learn. In my mission, we also had Hmong missionaries who learned Hmong, but I was English speaking California missionary.
Yeah. So I remember, we had just a few months to get you ready and get you out there. And they give you a whole packet of things that you're supposed to bring with you and prepare, scriptures that you need to bring with you and what not to bring. And we had to go and buy all of the clothes that you were going to wear basically for your entire 18-month mission. And it was specific about skirt length and all of those kinds of things. And so there was a lot of shopping to do, and we had to buy you bedding. You needed a coat, like you had never been in cold weather for an extended period of time. So I just remember having to prepare all of that stuff with you. And it was overwhelming because of the timing, but also financially, know. And so we were basically, my teaching income was the main source of income for our family. And Dad's business made less than I did as a teacher. So we didn't have extra money for all of these things. And we were really fortunate that a lot of family members stepped up and paid for a lot of things for you and were very generous with you. And then we gathered everything and we packed up the car, and I drove you up to Provo, where my sister was living. So we drove up there together, and we spent some time with my sister and my family up there before you went into the MTC. And I remember that being a very horrible week.
Yeah, it was the worst. It was so bad because when you leave to go into the MTC, you get set apart as a missionary. So they lay their hands on your head. They give you a special blessing. This is your calling. This is what you've been chosen to do, blah, 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 whatever.
You get set apart at home.
Yes, at home. And then you go directly to the MTC. But because we had a gap of a week in there where we were going to be at Libby's house, they set me apart and then we left, but we still had a whole week. And during that week, I still had to adhere to all the missionary rules, which includes having a companion. So my mom was my companion. She had to be within sight and sound of me at all times. They ask you to dress as a missionary as well, but I didn't have tags or anything yet. So, I didn't dress in my missionary clothes,
your skirts and
skirts and stuff. But they ask you to keep the missionary schedule, which is getting up at 6:30 in the morning, an hour of personal study, an hour of companion study. So yeah, that was horrible. And also I was kind of casually dating somebody still, and he was in Provo, and Mom hated him. She was like, absolutely not. You can't see him. You can't be alone with a boy.
I don't think
contention.
Yeah, it was a source of contention, and it wasn't that I hated him. It's that the circumstances of that relationship were not good. And I didn't feel like it was a positive situation for you. I think he was 24 or so and had already been divorced once.
Yes. So he was attending BYU. He came home from his mission and got married pretty much immediately. That marriage did not work out and he got divorced. And I think he was like, 23 or 24. So
yeah,
Mom didn't love that.
I did not love that for you. And also, it's not that I disliked him as a person, but personality wise, I felt like he was not really a match for you. And I just was so unsettled about how that was all going to work out. And I think at the time, the plan was that you guys were going to continue to communicate while you were on your mission.
Yes. So
write
that's
letters
not
or whatever.
uncommon is,
Right.
If you have a beau or somebody back home, they would write you while you were on your mission. And, some people choose to be exclusive that way. And some people say like, I'll date around, but I'm waiting for you to get home. Some people get like a Dear John letter halfway through their mission saying I got married to somebody else. I mean, it's like a thing.
Yeah, I was thinking to myself that this would be a huge distraction to you and that it was going to interfere with your ability to be a good missionary. And since he had already left his mission and been married, I felt like it was going to make you want to leave early. It was a horrible week because you were still communicating with him. And I think you were
still had my
texting or
phone.
calling. You still had your cell phone, which when you go into the MTC, you surrender your cell phone. Yeah, I remember I was really frustrated with that situation and frustrated with you. And you had talked about maybe not going. You were kind of on the fence that week.
It felt very scary.
Yeah, for sure. And admittedly, I was not very compassionate with you during that week because my focus was like, just get on the mission, just go on the mission, just get, and once you do that, you'll be safe. You'll be away from this guy. You'll be, instead of thinking to myself, this is a really huge, overwhelming, scary thing that my daughter's about to do. And I just want to support her being settled and healthy and peaceful about the decision she's going to make. And if she decides not to go, it's okay. Like that wasn't in my mind anywhere, but I wish it had been.
Yeah. And I will say like at this time, I would say you and I had a very surface level relationship and we didn't really have any emotional, like mental health skills. That wasn't really something that was on our radar at that time. It's not something that people were really talking about openly yet. This was 10 years ago, and we were both mentally ill and did not have the resources and the language to communicate in a way that would have been helpful about this situation. So I don't
and this was
resentment or like anger about this at all, because I think we were both just doing our best to get through that time because it was really hard.
Yeah. And this was shortly after I had just begun therapy. And so I had not addressed any of my sexual abuse issues or any of my childhood abuse issues or any of my marital abuse issues. I was still very much in dissociative mode. I had my blinders on and my head down, and I was just doing what I had to do to survive. I really was in survival mode. And so mental, emotional health didn't come into it. I was just barely starting to learn about self-care. I don't think I had yet admitted to myself that any of the situations I had been in were abusive. So I was still kind of in this la la land ether, not reality. I was not in reality. I wasn't grounded. And I was just trying to, I think that I felt as a parent that getting you on a mission was going to teach you some of the things that you needed to learn in order to then have a healthier, happier life afterwards. And I did sort of put it on this pedestal as an experience of like, well, I did my best with you as a kid. The mission is going to teach you the next thing. And then everything will be all right after that.
Well, that's how it's sold to you in the church. And that's how it's talked about is like the mission is the lifeline. If you can get your kid on a mission, they'll figure their stuff out. It's like,
and they'll be faithful for the rest of their lives.
If they're struggling, they won't struggle anymore. Like, kind of thing. And that's how it's sold to you. So it makes sense that you were just thinking like, if I can just get this girl on a mission, everything will be better,
Yeah.
And that's, I don't think that I thought that necessarily because I didn't particularly see anything wrong with myself, I guess. But because I had that spiritual experience with Amanda, that's just what I kept falling back on. That I'm going to go on the mission. Nobody's going to tell me that I'm not going. Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And even though I had this guy and, like, you know, our relationship wasn't the greatest at the time or whatever, like, I wasn't going to let a guy keep me from going on my mission. I wasn't going to let anybody tell me that I wasn't going, because I knew that was what I was supposed to do. And that was what God wanted me to do. So it felt very much like you didn't see me at that time, because I was so invested in it and I wanted to be there, and I knew I was supposed to do it. And it felt like there were people in my life, maybe you, maybe Amanda, that were kind of expecting me to fail, or like expecting me to maybe not do it, or I don't know. It was weird. Obviously I don't know what you were feeling at that time, but it was sort of like people wouldn't have been surprised if I had said, oh, I won't go, I'm going to get married to this guy instead, kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. I think that was my fear. I think my fear was that if you didn't go on the mission, that you were going to marry that dude. And I knew that was just bad. I did not think that he was going to be able to connect with you, support you, be emotionally healthy for you, all of that kind of stuff. And so I felt like it's either go on the mission or she's going to marry this dude and it's going to end badly, you know?
Well, and let's be clear here. I was 19.
Yes, exactly.
I was 19 and this wasn't my first serious boyfriend, but anecdotally, you hear stories like this all the time in the church of she was preparing to go on a mission and then she met her husband. So she didn't go and she got married. Right. You know, and everybody kind of puts that, like, that's acceptable. And it's not weird when you're in the church, because the priority for young women is to get married and have children.
Right.
Young.
Right.
So,
and also you were the age at which I got pregnant with you. And I hadn't worked through any of that, or any of that circumstances, those feelings. I wasn't married. I had to go through LDS social services. Like, all of that was so traumatic for me, and I hadn't worked through it yet. So watching you have a moment where you were struggling with I think equally as big of a decision, a life-changing decision. I think when we're parents that haven't worked through something, when our kid gets to that spot, it re-traumatizes us.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I definitely was in trauma mode at the time. So we didn't talk about the endowment experience, and I want to save that for another time, because that in itself is its whole separate thing. So we can talk about that later. Right now, I want to talk about you being in the MTC. We dropped you off at the curb. I remember turning off your cell phone and putting it in my purse and just having this huge sigh of relief. And Libby and I just, my sister, Libby and I just sat there and cried and cried and cried. We were relieved, but we were also like, I was so sad to be saying goodbye to you. You know, I felt like it had been such a hard week, and gosh, just so many emotions came up for me. And to drive up to the MTC, you get out of the car, we unload your suitcases, I give you one last hug, and that's it.
They whisk you away. Yeah.
They whisk you away immediately. They don't want you to linger at the curb. And so they took you away immediately. And then there was someone in line behind us to drop their kid off. And we went across the street to the temple parking lot and just sat there and cried and cried. So what was that like for you?
Well, I've blocked a lot of this out. There's not a lot, and just in general in my life, I feel like I don't really remember specific things, but I do remember vividly how things made me feel. And there are some things that I do remember. So I'll share the things I do remember. They whisked you away pretty much immediately. There's like a welcome to the new missionaries, because I think they have new missionaries come in like once a week, every Tuesday or something like that. So like that's the day that all the new missionaries come. There's a big devotional with all the new missionaries. You pretty quickly get assigned a companion and a zone is what they call it. So it's like a small group of missionaries that are all going to a similar place or the same place, maybe not the same mission, but my zone was, I think, maybe 8 of us. And My companion and I were the only ones going to Santa Rosa, but the rest of the zone was going to California somewhere. And those are the people that you have in your classes with you. Those are the people that you eat with, that you spend time with. And it was a mix of elders and sisters. I think there was another set of sisters in my zone, and then maybe 4 or 6 boys. I can't remember. Yeah, the MTC, the Missionary Training Center, is very intense because they're preparing you to be a missionary full time. But it's not reality. It's not real life. And it's really hard to explain unless you've been there, but they expect you to keep the missionary schedule, which is, getting up at 6:30, doing your exercise. I think it's like 30 minutes of exercise. Then you've got a little bit of time to get dressed for the day, an hour of personal study, an hour of companion study. And then the rest of the time, the MTC, you're in classes. And some people go to the MTC for a really long time because they have to learn a language, like Russian or Spanish or whatever. But because we were English speaking missionaries, I was only there for 12 days, which was good because I don't think I could have survived longer than 12 days.
And you also had your birthday in the MTC.
Yes, I turned 20 in the MTC.
So we dropped you off, what was it, 5 or 6 days before your birthday?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. And so what was that like, having your birthday in the MTC? I will never forget the picture that you sent me. It was a picture of you sitting on the floor next to a bunk bed, and you had a bunch of little packages. And I think we had sent you a package for your birthday with a bunch of little things in it.
Yes. So when you're in the Missionary Training Center, if you're local, you can drop things off or have things delivered at the MTC, and then they'll have you come get it from the mailroom or whatever. So I think Libby and her family sent me some treats, like some cupcakes or something like that from a bakery in town. And people were writing me letters and things like that throughout the week. And you sent me a care package. But it was like the worst birthday of my life. It was up to that point, because birthdays are a big deal in our family. And we always made a big deal of birthdays. It was like, you eat all your favorite things. You get to do all your favorite things. And it was like a normal day. It was like any other day as a missionary, with the added just horribleness of being at the MTC. The MTC was really difficult for me because it is so rigorous. It's like being on a mission, but worse. It's like they want you to have this very solid foundation before you go out on the mission. So they're very strict about all the rules. It's like letter of the law. You may do this, you may not do that. On Sunday night, I remember so vividly, they had all the sister missionaries go into a separate large auditorium where they had this devotional, and it was all about the appearance and dress and grooming of a sister missionary. And there was like slides and examples of things that you were allowed to wear and not allowed to wear. And at that time, skirts had to be below the knee, no cleavage at all. So the clothing had to cover the garments, but it also had to be modest, professional, closed-toed shoes, no nail polish. Your hair had to be nice. You didn't have to do your hair, but you had to look nice and put together. They didn't have specific, you have to wear makeup, but they said something like makeup enhances your inner beauty if you choose to wear it, neutral colors.
Nylons or pantyhose?
No, that used to be something that they made sisters do.
Yeah.
Like when Amanda was on her mission in the 90s in El Salvador, she had to wear pantyhose. And these really chunky Clark's shoes. But over the years, it's gotten more and more lax, but we had to wear a skirt or a dress that had to be below the knee, which at that time, midi skirts, that style, was just barely something that you could buy in a store, but it wasn't super popular yet. And so it was very hard for me to find skirts that were long enough. And I actually had to purchase skirt extenders, which was just a skirt, a slip that had a big chunk of lace at the bottom, so that I could wear that under a skirt or a dress that wasn't quite long enough, because even when you were sitting, it had to cover your knees.
Yeah. And I remember not being able to find appropriate skirts in Texas. And so we waited to buy
things.
Yeah. And we waited to buy a lot of your stuff until we went to Provo, because there they have lots of stores that are geared towards getting a missionary ready for the mission. They have Mr. Mac for the guys, which is a suit warehouse.
Right.
And then they did have some stuff for women there, but then there were some specific stores that would sell like the undershirt, the shade shirt, remember, that would cover
I had a lot of
cap
those.
sleeve
Yep.
of the garment shirt, and it was a scoop neck, so that even if your shirt was too low, you could wear the shade shirt under it and still cover the garments. And then they had the midi skirts and stuff like that. And so there were places in Utah that were, in Provo specifically, that's their whole business, is that they outfit missionaries, right?
Right. But those stores are not cheap,
You're
by
right.
the way. It was very expensive to buy all the clothes and shoes that I needed. I mean, I like clothes, so I wanted to have lots of options and things that I could wear with other things and mix and match and whatever. But in the MTC during this presentation, they specifically said, if you have something that is like sheer, you're not allowed to wear anything sheer, even if you have one of those little cap sleeve shirts under it that's covering your garments. You can't wear anything sheer. You can't wear anything too tight. And even like a pencil skirt would have been considered too tight in the bum. They didn't want to see the curvature of your bum. I mean, it was crazy, like all of these rules. And I just remember being so frustrated and coming back to my dorm room at that time with my companion and the two other sisters that we shared a room with, and just being so frustrated and crying because I was like, I just spent all this money on these clothes that I thought were acceptable to wear as a missionary. And now they're telling me that I can't wear any of them because I can't wear things that are sheer or form-fitting or, whatever. And I just felt so frustrated. And it really felt like unless you were wearing a cardigan sweater buttoned all the way up and a string of pearls, you were not good enough. And it was really, really demoralizing.
Yeah, and also the people who were giving you this information, are they senior missionaries? They're older people, right?
Well, there is a mission president and wife that preside over the MTC. And then there are senior couples that are also coming there to be trained to go out on their missions, like retired couples. And then there are teachers and people that work there full time. And then there are volunteers that come and volunteer and teach classes. So it was, I think it was the mission president's wife that presided over the MTC.
Right. And she would have been about how old?
Maybe like a mission president and his wife have to be very financially secure and pretty much retired. So they're like usually 50s, 60s, 70s sometimes.
Yeah. And again, the people making the decisions about the dress code are the mission presidents, right? But they're also getting guidance from Salt Lake about that as well, right?
So Salt Lake has what's called the Missionary Handbook. It's this little white handbook that has all of the hard and fast church-wide mission rules. And one of them is skirts below the knee, the schedule, like all that stuff. That all comes from Salt Lake. Then when you get out into the mission field, wherever you're assigned, the mission president can provide other guidelines or mission-specific rules. And he kind of chooses like what to enforce and what to not enforce kind of thing. The MTC is incredibly strict, and it was just so emotionally taxing, and it was just like being like trying to drink from a fire hose. It was just so much information and so many rules and getting used to a schedule. And for somebody that is neurodivergent, it was just very, very hard. And it's also like you're inside most of the day in like fluorescent lighting. And it was just like, I need to go outside and touch grass. Like I can't, I mean, it was so hard. And my mission companion, she was honestly such a doll. She was so sweet. She was like one of 10 kids, and 2 of them were out on missions at the same time as her. And she came from this big Mormon family, and she really had, compared to all the life experience and like things I learned on the street as a teenager, she had none of that. I mean, it was just like this pure, innocent, naive, but she was very sweet and very kind. And because she had to be within sight and sound of me 24/7, I'm sure that was hard for her because she and I were not alike in any way, but she was very kind. And there were like any chance we could, I would drag her outside and say, like, if we have to study, let's study on the grass. If we have to do this, like, let's be outside doing it. Because I couldn't be in there. It was so hard.
I'm so glad you did that. But the description of the MTC, I refer to it as a cult within a cult, because you're isolated away from your family. You don't have a cell phone. You're not allowed to communicate with anybody except for once a week. You can email and answer emails.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a uniform for all intents and purposes.
Right.
You're 24/7 with another person. And this is another way that high control groups kind of keep their people in line, is that if you are with another person and you both know the expectations and the rules, it's sort of like, oh, I don't want to break the rules because my companion is right here. They're going to see I'm breaking the rules and they're going to tell on me.
Yes.
So it's like you inform on each other if somebody's not towing the line, like if your companion was doing something they shouldn't be doing, it was your responsibility to let somebody know, right?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And that did happen to me a few times.
And then also you're getting up early. You're expected to study basically the whole day. You're either studying with your companion or you're in a class of some kind, and they're filling you with information like all day long, and then you go to sleep. So I feel like it's sleep deprivation, it's information overwhelm, it's isolation, it's controlling, what you wear and all of that kind of stuff.
What you eat, the food too.
Exactly. And what you drink, and how much you're allowed to eat, because you're not making your own food or preparing your own food. You're in a cafeteria setting, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's a cafeteria, and it's like there's not a restriction or a limit. It's just like you're limited on time. So
right, that's what I was going to say.
You have like a chunk of time where you can eat breakfast, and these are the options, and you just choose one, and I just hated the food at the MTC was terrible at that time. I don't know if it's gotten any better, but it was not like healthy options. I remember there was like a salad bar, and I would just go get like a pile of spinach and put it on my plate because I just needed like green vegetables. It was a lot of like casserole-y type lasagna, like really heavy fattening foods. And I was like, I don't know what's in this. And it didn't taste good.
About how many people were in the MTC when you
hundreds. So that's the other thing too, is that because of the age change the previous year, there was this huge influx of a ton of missionaries at the same time, and I was right on the tail end of that. And that's why my MTC, if you were speaking English, you were only there for 12 days because they had to get you in and get you out. So, which ended up being a blessing. But I think before that, it was at least 2 weeks, if not longer, that you would have been in the MTC. So I think at the time that I was there were easily like 300-400 missionaries, but maybe more.
Yeah. So the cafeteria is not big enough for all of you, right? So were you eating in
No,
sheds?
we had assigned times that we would go to our meals.
So it's institutional cooking. It's worse than a school cafeteria, because you have to, we know how frugal the church is, right? They could afford to have people come in and cater good food for you guys, but they didn't. Of course, they wanted to do it as cheaply as possible. And so if you think of a school cafeteria, like just having to make food for hundreds of people the cheapest way that you possibly could, and serve it in a way that gets you in and out quickly so that the next shift of people can come in.
Right.
So nothing nutritional, like very starchy stuff, lots of carbs, not a lot of protein because protein's expensive,
I mean, they had like normal, like what you would feed a large crowd kind of dinners, it was like.
But that was every meal for 12 days.
Yes. Yeah. And it was, you could choose not to eat whatever you wanted, or, you could pick different things from they had like a salad station, and they had like I can't remember exactly, a cold cereal station in the morning. And there was like, I don't know. There was always like the main thing that they were serving. And then they maybe had like one other option, a couple of sides, the salad bar. Yeah, that's a little bit blurry for me, but I do specifically remember, because I don't have any dietary restrictions, thankfully. I'm not allergic to anything, but I do like to eat food that fuels my body, that tastes good. So
Yeah.
it was like you could have a salad, but the dressing option was ranch, and it was like romaine lettuce, So I just did my best with that. The chocolate milk was good. Everybody talks about the chocolate milk and how good it is because it comes from the BYU Creamery.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was not ideal.
Yeah, and you're not allowed to leave. So it's not like you could go, leave the MTC and go to, Del Taco or whatever. Oh,
No.
Cafe Rio. You couldn't leave the MTC and go to Cafe Rio.
Sometimes people's parents would send them like care packages that had snacks and other food and stuff, and we were allowed to have that stuff in our dorm rooms. I remember somebody getting like a 12-pack of Dr. Pepper as a care package or something. Like their family just dropped it off from Costco or whatever.
Yeah.
So they didn't limit like snacks or treats or anything like that, but you're not in your room. You don't have time. You're eating that stuff at like 10 p.m. The only other thing I wanted to mention about the MTC that feels really crazy to me is the way that they teach you how to teach the lessons. So there is like a manual. It's called Preach My Gospel. It's written by the church for missionaries. These are the lessons that we would like you to teach as missionaries. So that's what they're teaching from in the MTC is the Preach My Gospel manual. And part of that is doing these like role play scenarios. So like return missionaries from BYU or students from BYU or whatever will come in and pretend to be, at that time they called it an investigator, pretend to be an investigator, somebody that's interested in learning more about the church, and you and your companion would practice teaching them a lesson. And so much of what they say is just like follow the Spirit, try and stay, on the lesson plan, begin every lesson with a prayer, like that kind of stuff. But they mostly just want you to practice like receiving spiritual revelation and teaching to this pretend investigator or whatever. And I just remember feeling like, this is so dumb. Like this person is already probably a lifelong member of the church. They're just pretending to be such and such guy that just got out of prison and whatever. Like they're given like a profile of like, this is the person that you are. This is the lesson that the missionaries are going to teach you. And they just like pretend to be somebody else. So I was like, how am I supposed to receive revelation for this like fake investigator that's not actually experiencing these things that they're wanting me to teach them? It was very weird, and I never felt good about it. And it was so weird because some missionaries would get so into it. Like they'd come out of this lesson crying, and I had this great spiritual experience, and we taught this investigator that the gospel blesses families and he can be with his dead daughter forever. It was like stuff like that. And I was like, that's not real. Like that kid goes to BYU. It's like, it's weird. So the whole experience of the MTC was just horrible for me, just because it's so isolating. I felt very demoralized. I felt like I wasn't good enough to be there. And it just didn't feel real to me. I was like, what is the point of this? If I'm going to be in California teaching actual people, like the only way that I'm going to learn how to do that is by doing it, by practicing. But I've kind of always been that way when it comes to like school and institutions that are trying to tell me what to do. I'm like, what's the point of this? Like, you got to give me a reason. And I think it's because I have ADHD, like that's a very ADHD trait, is that you want to know the reason that somebody's telling you to do something because it has to make logical sense to you. And nothing about the MTC made logical sense to me. I was like, all of this is stupid. I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. I wanted to be a missionary. So I stuck it out because I knew that this is what I needed to do, that this is what God wanted me to do. And this was just part of it.
Yeah. And also that's definitely a trait that I have as well. Like I'm just a bottom line person, just like skip to the end, tell me what the bottom line is. And if I ever get the sense that somebody is trying to, overly embellish something or make some kind of an emotional connection that's not actually there.
You see through the bullshit so fast.
Yeah, it makes me so uncomfortable and impatient that I just want to get done with it. So you describing this to me, like this is just so much my experience too. Like you and I are so much alike in that way. It's like, please stop trying to BS me and just tell me what really is going on here.
Yes, it felt very much like I was being emotionally manipulated a lot of the time. And I didn't know that at the time. I didn't have the language to like voice. I didn't know that that was a thing. But they really do try to manipulate your emotions and like create, like falsify these experiences so that you have like, I don't know. Sometimes I think about the idea of a testimony in the gospel is just like a collection of spiritual experiences that you can look back on and say, like, this strengthened my testimony of this, and this is why I believe it. And this strengthened my testimony of this, and this is why I believe this. And it was like they were trying to create these experiences for you so that you would have a stronger testimony to be able to share, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So I feel like this is a good time to talk about spiritual experiences, because when you were talking earlier about wanting to go on a mission because you felt like that was the right thing to do, and you'd been waiting for this spiritual confirmation because you had prayed about going to France and didn't feel like you got an answer. And then all of a sudden, when Amanda told you that her dad was helping with all of this stuff, and her dad said, there's someone in your ward who needs to go on a mission, and I don't know who it is, and you felt like this huge confirmation. I just want to say that was one of the hardest things for me coming out of the church, was like, but I've had all these spiritual experiences, and I've had all of these witnesses from God that this was true and it was right. And throughout my entire life, I've had my prayers answered and all of that. But I think that what happens is that when you are programmed your whole life to believe that you need to act a certain way, you need to talk a certain way, you need to look a certain way, your life needs to look like something very particular, and then you do those things, you sort of have this endorphin response of like, I'm doing the right thing. It's sort of like, for me, what I had to look back on was like the first time that I really felt the Spirit really, really strongly, like I felt overwhelmed by it, was when I was a teenager and we went to go sing Christmas carols at a nursing home, and seeing people's faces light up as we walked through the hallways singing songs. And so I love singing anyway, so that I was already full of singing endorphins, right? And then I watched people's faces light up, and that made me feel even better because I was making them feel good. And so what I attributed as the Holy Ghost was really just those feel-good endorphins of me doing something that I felt was right or that I was taught was right. And I can imagine that being in the MTC and being sort of like fatigued and not fed well and tired and going through all of that, I can imagine that getting out of the MTC, maybe your endorphin level went up and you felt like good about being out there among the people. Or what was that like for you, the spiritual aspect of it? I just wanted to talk about, the quote unquote feeling the confirmation of the Holy Ghost and things like that.
Well, they tell you, and this is something that they talk about in church on Sunday, I mean, over and over and over, you get these lessons on the Holy Ghost and receiving a spiritual witness and a confirmation. I mean, like the Sunday school lessons and all that stuff, you hear about this all the time. And a main theme of like a normal Sunday message is, how do I know that I'm receiving confirmation from the Spirit? Or how do I know that the Spirit is directing me? Or what does the Holy Ghost really feel like? Like they start teaching you these lessons very, very young in primary. And so one of the things that I was told over and over throughout my whole life is that you'll know you're receiving a spiritual witness when you feel it in your mind and in your heart. Or if you're having a thought over and over and over, that's usually the Spirit telling you to do something. Or if any good or righteous thing comes from the Spirit. So, for example, I have a feeling over and over and over, like through my brain will tell me, you should text this person. You should text this person. You should text, and over the course of several days, I'll have that thought. And once I recognize that I'm having the same thought over and over, I will text that person because I feel like it's the Spirit telling me that they need me to text them. And then maybe 2 weeks later or something in church, they'll tell me, thank you so much for your kind text. It came at a time when I really needed it. And that would affirm to me that that was a spiritual prompting. It was something that they needed. The Lord was directing me. And it's kind of this idea that like the Lord answers prayers through other people. So somebody will be inspired to do something or say something to you, and that will be the Lord working through that person to answer your prayer or bless you in some way or whatever. And they talk about that, in the Bible, but also just in the church about missionaries is you are the Lord's hands. You are the representatives of Christ on this earth. You are to receive revelation and then act on those promptings. And not just as a missionary, but always when you're a member of the church. But you get a lot of practice doing it on your mission because that's all you're doing all day long. So, I mean, I don't know what specifically you wanted to talk about, but I think it was the first time in my life where I was so in tune with my feelings, because so much of your feelings are considered to be spiritual promptings, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess what I wanted to touch on is the focus in the MTC and on the mission of trying to get investigators to feel the Spirit. And that's, you want to teach them that the Holy Ghost is going to confirm to you that what I'm saying is true. And this is how you recognize that. So was that a big focus in the MTC and afterwards in training and things like that?
Yes. Yes and no. I would say that my impression was that when you teach the lessons and you share your testimony with somebody, they will feel your spirit and your resolve, and that like the spiritual experience will create itself, if that makes sense. Like if you open the lesson with a prayer and invite the Spirit to be with you, and throughout the whole time you're having your lesson, you're thinking about what does this person need? What does the Lord want me to share with this person? And then you do those things, that will create a spiritual experience and they will feel it. So it wasn't necessarily like a manipulative thing, like you need to create an environment but it was like, if you do these things, this will create a spiritual environment. And then that person is going to receive whatever revelation they're going to receive from the Holy Ghost.
Yeah. So I want to talk just a little bit about the financial aspect of the mission, because I feel like this is a big deal. I feel like people need to understand this. And it's a little bit of, I want people who are Mormons and non-Mormons to treat missionaries with kindness and care, because they are basically starving, isolated, and they're not well. Missionaries are required to pay their own way to go on a mission. When I was a kid, it used to be that if wherever you got called, each mission had its own price tag attached to it. And so like if you got called to Japan, it was a super expensive mission. It could be as much as $1,000 a month. If you got called to Alabama, it was like $200 a month. And eventually the church in Salt Lake decided to equalize the cost of a mission. So now all of the missionaries pay the same regardless of where they're going. It's the thing that's hard for me is that the church has so much money that they could pay missionaries to go and do the labor of teaching about the church, because it really is free labor. And I feel like they could pay all of the missionaries' expenses. They could give them a clothing allowance. They could give them a food allowance. They could pay them a living wage, basically, and provide housing for them that was, stable and safe and everything like that. And my nephew went on a mission to Liberia, and he was telling us about how they had to go to the store every day. And the people in his mission were very poor, so they couldn't afford to feed the missionaries dinner. And so they were responsible for all their own meals, but they would have to go to the market, buy their food, come home, immediately cook it and eat it. Because if they put anything in a cupboard, the rats would eat everything, And it's like, that's not stable living conditions,
Right.
And I feel like so many of the missionaries, especially in poorer countries, are really in dangerous conditions. It's not safe, it's not healthy, it's not sanitary. But in the United States, at least, you do have members who can help take care of you and help feed you and everything like that. But it's you or your family are basically paying for the mission. And I do remember it was $450 a month. We
I
had a
mean,
couple
10 years ago when I went,
yeah, 10 years ago. Yeah. We had a couple of family members who were contributing to that amount. I couldn't afford to pay for the whole thing, certainly. But our ward was really good about, we had a really great bishop at the time.
Yes, he was amazing.
And yeah, and our ward at the time was really good about contributing to your mission. We had some family members contribute. But that $450 doesn't go to you.
No.
You're not like retaining that money. So
No.
that money gets paid to Salt Lake. And then the church gives you like a prepaid debit card, right?
Right.
And it's like a couple $100 a month.
Yeah, it depends on which mission you're in, the stipend that you get. But yeah, you get paid. The money gets loaded into your account once a month. In my mission, it was a couple $100 maybe. And because I was a stateside, English-speaking missionary, the expectation is that the members of your congregation are feeding you dinner every night. So that money is mostly just to provide you breakfast, lunches, and then any hygiene or things that you need.
And clothes, if your clothes were out.
If your clothes were out, exactly. Yeah. So.
And I remember having to replace your bedding at one point because I remember sending you Amazon links to comforters and I was like, pick which one you want. Because there was some situation where you had brought some bedding with you, but there wasn't enough.
I brought
and then
a set of sheets and
right.
like a throw blanket. I think it might have even been this throw blanket. I can't remember. Because I wasn't going to carry around a comforter in my suitcase,
Right.
But then I got there and I needed to have a comforter. I think I just used what was in the apartments because like they furnished the apartments. Some people preferred to have their own stuff, but I used what was in the apartments for a really long time. And then I got a comforter from another sister who had gotten it from the mission president. And she just gave it to me and was like, here, you can have this. I wasn't allowed to go on Amazon. Like they were extremely strict about what you were and were not allowed to do on the internet. So
yeah,
that wasn't a thing. Like unless your family sent it to you, unless you said, hey, I need this, please send it to me. I wasn't allowed to shop or have things delivered. It was like if we could go buy it in a store, then that was one thing. I could go and buy things in a store on P-Day. But yeah, that was really hard.
Yeah, I mean, knowing how particular you are about the feel of fabrics and things like that, I'm that way too. And knowing how particular you are about colors and all of those things, I remember getting the email from you that you needed a new comforter, and I remember kind of panicking because I was like, how am I going to pick a comforter that's something that you're going to like and want to use, and that's going to be
well, and how are you going to get it to me? Because the mail situation is very weird. I don't know if it's the same now as it was then, but you as a parent would send a package to our mission office, which was in Santa Rosa, and then they would forward it to me wherever I was at the time. So it would take a long time for things to get to me, and also there was sometimes, they would hold it for a long time or not, I don't think I ever got mail that was lost, but there was that possibility always too, that things would get lost.
I think there were a couple of care packages that we sent to you that didn't get to you. So I want people to understand. So you're in the Santa Rosa mission. When you fly from Provo to your mission, you go to the mission home, right, for a couple of days, and then they assign you to an area.
Well, that's not what happened for me, but yes.
Oh, okay.
That's usually how it works. So I flew from Provo to Oakland. I called you in the airport in Salt Lake because I could. There were payphones there, so I could call you. And most people were calling their parents to say goodbye. We were taking turns at the payphone. I flew to Oakland, and then the mission president picks you up with a couple of his assistants. They drive you, because we didn't have an airport in our mission, they drove us from Oakland to Santa Rosa. They assigned me my companion that day, and we drove 4 hours up to Eureka, which was my first area, from Santa Rosa up to Eureka. So it was a really long travel day. I didn't have any in between time. There was no overnight. Like, it was, you're here, you're going to go to your area now.
And did you have any money at all when you were traveling that day? Like when you were in the airport, did you have money where you could eat, or how did they handle that?
I can't remember if they gave us any money. I had my own debit card, and it's so crazy to me thinking about this now, because I remember having to. Now everybody does their banking on an app, right? Like, you can pull up your banking app and see how much money is in your account and whatever. But I had saved up all this money, with Amanda, working for her. And so I had my own wallet with my own debit cards and credit cards and stuff. And so I don't recall them giving me any kind of money for travel, but I did have some money because I had saved it. And when I was out in the field, I couldn't get online and see how much money was in my account. And I couldn't, pull it up on my phone, because we had like flip phones, like analog buttons. Yeah. There was no touch screen phones or anything. And
it wasn't a smartphone.
It wasn't a smartphone. So I would call the USAA number on the back of my debit card, and they would tell me how much money was, like, I could request my balance, and they would tell me how much money was in my account. So anytime I would go shopping, I would have my Missionary debit card that I would use all the money on every month. And then anything else I needed, I would pay for with my own money, and I would have to call and make sure that I had enough money in there, basically.
Yeah. And so, the other thing is, I was telling you that I remember the missionaries that taught Dad. We went through several sets of missionaries when he was taking the discussions, as they called it back then. And we got to know them really well, because they were gung-ho about getting Dad baptized, and they were over at our house all the time. And so they would tell us probably more than a member would get to know about missionaries, just, who were over once a month or whatever. And they were telling us that, which apartments that they lived in. And they told us what the church would do is they would find a really inexpensive apartment, and they would take out like a 10-year lease, so that the rent would stay the same for 10 years or however the longest lease was. And then as missionaries would move in and out of the area, they would just come to the same apartment. So they were always living in the same apartment, and there was never that like end of lease, like check out to see if everything's working, if everything's clean, if they need to refresh the paint or things like that. So the elders that were teaching Dad had been in this were living in this apartment that was really in a sketchy place, because over the course of time, neighborhoods change, right? And so this was a really, really sketchy place. It was like the place that you would go if you wanted to buy drugs, because everybody just knew that was, whatever. Yeah. And the apartment was really run down. And they were telling us how, like, when they first got there was just a mattress on the floor. But then eventually they told the mission office there were no bed frames. And so they were able to get a member to donate some bunk beds to them. And just the conditions in the apartment were not clean. They had bugs everywhere. It was just like, gross. I remember them telling me this and thinking, like, this is San Antonio. Like, we're in civilization, right? We live in a relatively nice part of town, and those are the worst apartments in this part of town, and they're not in a safe place. So could we not move the missionaries to another apartment complex that is better? So I just want people to be aware, just because missionaries are in the United States doesn't necessarily mean that they're in safe housing that's clean, that's sanitary, any of that stuff. A lot of these kids, these 19 and 20-year-old kids, are out of their homes for the very first time, not really knowing like how to cook a lot of healthy meals and things like that. A lot of them don't learn that before they go on their mission. And a lot of them are in conditions that are poverty conditions. And so I just want people to be aware that that's the case. $200 back then, 10 years ago, right? For the entire month. And that was supposed to pay for your breakfast and lunch every day and any incidentals, hygiene products, shoes, clothes, bedding, whatever expenses came up had to come out of that. Makeup and you know, it just baffles me that the church has so much money and yet the missionaries are all, regardless of where they are in the world, are in poverty conditions. Now, some missionaries are fortunate enough to have families that will help them, give them extra money, send them extra food and things like that, but not all of them do.
Yeah, and it is mission specific, I will say, as well. So in my mission, I was in, Northern California. All of the areas that I served in were safe. We had, we had an elder and sister missionary, a retired couple that was, their whole responsibility was missionary housing. So they would travel to all the different areas. They would check on the apartments. They would make sure that they were furnished. They would make sure that everything was working properly. We had a whole storage unit in the mission that was full of furniture. So if a desk broke or a bed broke or something, like they would, deliver it and keep the apartments nice and stuff. And they were in charge of the rent and communicating with the landlords and stuff. So in my mission, we never had to do any of that. There was one area that I lived in Marin County, which if you don't know, like Marin County is a very affluent part of Northern California, right by San Francisco. And we were living in this apartment that was big enough to house like 6 missionaries. And it was just my companion and I, because like I said at the beginning of this, I was right at the tail end of this huge influx of missionaries. So at one time there were 6 missionaries in that apartment and we had bunk beds and whatever. But over time it was just my companion and I in that area, in this huge apartment where the church was paying like thousands of dollars a month for this apartment. And I just remember thinking, like, this is wasteful. I sent, a message, or maybe I called them or talked to them one day, to the housing missionaries. And I was like, hey, this is not necessary. And also at that time we were having to drive into the area where we were teaching people. So I told them, like, we don't need to live here. If we found an apartment here that was smaller, we would be a lot closer to the people that we're teaching. It would make a lot of sense. And you guys would probably save a lot of money on rent because, this apartment is like a 3-bedroom. And if we just get a 1-bedroom, so I kind of tried, like, when I was in each apartment, I would kind of assess, but that's also like how I am as a person. If there was ever anything wrong, I'm the person that calls right away to have it fixed, kind of thing. But that's who I am. A lot of these, especially elders, are like 18-year-old, just left high school. They've never lived on their own before. They have no idea how to take care of a home. They have no idea how to shop for groceries or budget their money. Like, they're having to figure out all this stuff. So elder apartments were notoriously run down and gross compared to sister apartments. That's just kind of how it was in my mission. But yeah, a lot of elders and sisters that I knew had their families, like they would have a credit card or something and their family would put money in that account every month, or they would, they worked it out or whatever. So there were some missionaries in my mission that monthly stipend was all the money that they had, because their families could not afford to give them any extra. And there were other missionaries that obviously had a lot of family support. So it was a big mix. And thankfully, all of the areas that I served in, I only had to make dinner for myself a handful of times because most of the church members wanted to have us in their home and wanted to feed us dinner. And if they didn't, I was the missionary that would call and say, hey, we don't have a dinner on Wednesday night. Is it okay if we come to your house? And I would invite myself over. So
yeah.
And not everybody does that, but.
Right. And I think it was somewhere around 2018 or 2019 where they started telling us that the missionaries were only allowed to stay 1 hour at our
that
house.
Was a rule in my mission too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so as a person inviting the missionaries over, it used to be that, we'd say, oh, come over around 6 o'clock. And at 6 o'clock, I would be finishing up, putting things together and getting things on the table. And then we would eat, and then they would give their message, and then we'd have some dessert, and then we'd say a prayer, and they would go home. So they would be with us for a couple of hours. And then when they said they could only be with us for an hour, it was like, okay, I better have dinner ready exactly when they get here.
Right.
Because they don't have time to, hang around either before or after dinner. And I remember one time, this was before this rule happened, but do you remember this, where one time we had the missionaries over for dinner, and I had made this lasagna that was like really, really good.
This is seared into my brain. It's a core memory.
Okay, you tell it.
She made this lasagna, and were you carrying it? Who was carrying it to the table?
I honestly can't remember.
I can't remember, but
I don't know if it was you or me.
Somebody was carrying
it. Might
to
have
the
been
table.
me.
Anyway,
I don't remember.
Somebody tripped, and the entire lasagna slid out of the pan and onto the floor. And at that time, we had a carpet underneath our dining room table. So there were like carpet fibers stuck in the lasagna, and we're like trying to like clean up the mess and scoop it back into the container. And the elders were like, "We'll just eat it anyway. It's okay." And we were like, "No, that's gross." Like, and then we ordered a pizza, which was sad. And I felt sad for you. Like, it's like a core memory branded into my brain, like the carpet fibers sticking out of the lasagna noodles. So
yeah, because for us at the time, I mean, we were poor at the time. I think we were on food stamps at the time, and I just remember like we saved our good food for like when the missionaries would come over, because we would feed them at least once a month. And so having lasagna was a big meal, because you had to buy 2 or 3 different kinds of cheese and meat, which was expensive,
and it takes a long time, and
to put all that time and effort into it. And so like we still had salad and whatever on the side, but it was that was a really rough night. And I felt bad because we had to then order pizza, which was even more money. We never got to order pizza when at that time when you guys were that age, because we couldn't afford to eat out. And so it was like double whammy spending the money on it. It was so stressful. But I felt bad for the missionaries, because I was worried they were going to get in trouble, because by the time we served the food and it fell on the floor, and then we ordered the pizza and had to wait for it to be ready, I was like, oh no, they're going to get in trouble. I remember feeling so stressed about that, like that we were going to get a phone call from the zone leader saying, where are these elders? They're supposed to be in their apartment already. And then maybe a couple of years ago, I heard that, at least in our area, that members were not allowed to feed the missionaries dinner anymore, because they wanted the missionaries in the homes of investigators and not in the homes of members anymore. Because it was so important that they be teaching people all the time. And I remember thinking, like, those poor kids are never going to get a good meal now. Yeah. Because they don't know how to cook dinner. They can't afford to get fast food or anything else. And what's the likelihood that a non-member is going to feed them, because there's not that tradition.
Right.
Like with
it's
members,
very culturally ingrained in Mormonism.
Right. They would pass around a calendar during the women's meeting, and it would fill up right away. And like, I remember people would like, there was one lady in particular in our ward whose name I won't mention, but you probably know who this is, who she would get with the person who was sending the missionary calendar around, and she would like pre-claim dates. So she was like, I want Thanksgiving, and I want Christmas, and I want like whatever, because she wanted to be the one to feed them a really good meal on those days. Yeah, and then which the calendar would come around. It is, yeah, it's great, because you want it. You want missionaries who are away from their family to have a good holiday experience. But we would sign up for a date on the calendar, and it was kind of like this pressure situation where if the calendar came to you and there was an open spot and you didn't sign up for it, judgment. Like, what, you don't want to feed the missionaries,
Interesting. So, I never felt that way, but
I always felt really pressured to make sure that we had the missionaries in our home at least once a month, especially if Dad wasn't attending. Right. I felt like that was super important. And I also wanted to feed the missionaries too, because I was always very empathetic to their situation. And then when we started to do a little better and have a little more money, whenever they came over, I would always ask them, like, is there anything you guys need? Do you need some extra food? I would always send them home with all the leftovers.
Yeah, that's
And
what I do too.
even now, when I see missionaries in the neighborhood, I will ask them if they're safe. I will ask them if they have enough to eat. I tell them all the time, like if they come to my door, like they know that I'm not in the church anymore, obviously, because they keep a record of, if they go to your house and knock on your door and you answer and you say, I'm an atheist, they're going to write that down in their area book.
Yes.
So the next missionaries know who's living at that house, right? But I told the missionaries anytime they come, I'm like, please write this down as a safe place. You guys can have as much food and water as you want whenever you come over here. And even though I'm not going to listen to your message, but if you're required to give me a message in order for me to give you food and water, I'll listen to it, So I just want people out there to sort of know this in their mind, that these kids, it may seem annoying to have them come knock on your door, but that's literally what they're expected to do. And they have to report back to their zone leader what they did that day and who they talked to and how many contacts. So can you talk about that, about the schedule of your day-to-day and what that was like?
Yeah, so my mission was extremely strict. They would often say ours is the most obedient mission in the world, which is crazy, but
who was saying that? The mission president?
The mission president and his wife.
Okay.
Ours is the most obedient mission in the world. We have the greatest missionaries because we're so obedient. So, the schedule is, at least for me, it was you wake up at 6:30. We had 30 minutes of mandatory exercise. We had to be out of the apartment, either walking or running or doing some sort of physical fitness. And then we would get home. We'd have a little bit of time to shower and get ready for the day. 8 a.m., you would do your hour of personal scripture study. And then 9 a.m. was an hour of companionship study. So you'd study with your companion and usually prepare the lessons that you were going to teach that day for whatever appointments you had. And then
I want to pause here because you were only allowed to have the only books you were allowed to have were the scriptures. So you had a Bible, a Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, the Pearl of Great Price. And that's what you were, and Preach My Gospel.
Which was
the lesson manual, basically.
You could also, there was a list of approved books that was like Jesus the Christ. There was a few other
former apostles, right?
And then you could also have access to all of the conference talks and like modern day revelation. So
so your study materials were that and only that.
Yes.
And it was an hour every day by yourself and an hour with your companion every day.
Yes. And then if you were speaking another language, you also had an hour of language study.
Okay.
I wasn't, so we just had our 2 hours in the morning and then we would go out for our appointments. But missionaries that are speaking another language also study that language for another hour in the morning. And then if you're a new missionary for the first 6 weeks, you do, or I think it's 12 weeks, you would do, they call it 12 week, where you kind of reiterate the lessons that you were learning in the MTC with your trainer in the mission field. So potentially some missionaries, if they're learning another language, have 4 hours of study in the morning. But if you're like me, for the first 12 weeks of my mission, I had 3 hours in the morning of study.
Yeah. And so, and did you have to keep track of that and then report it to somebody? Or was it just a companion honor system kind of a thing?
I mean, it was basically like an honor system thing. Like, your companion's going to be studying for an hour. The apartment is silent because you need quiet to receive revelation and read your scriptures. So it was like you could read whatever you wanted or you could take a nap or whatever, but your mission companion is going to report that to either your zone leader or the mission president or whatever, like sister so-and-so isn't reading her scriptures in the morning. She's taking an extra hour to get ready kind of thing.
Yeah. So if you're in the apartment, are you doing you have to be within sight of each other. So it's not like one of you is in the bedroom and the other one is in the kitchen. Like, are you in the same room together doing your personal study?
So all the apartments that I lived in, you would have your bedroom where you usually had bunk beds or twin beds. And then we always had a study area where we each had a desk And so it was like, instead of
Okay.
there being furniture in the living room, there were desks, and you got to sit and study together. And
So you didn't have like a sofa?
no, none of my apartments had couches.
Yeah, so there was no place to just relax unless you were in your bed. And you could
Right.
only be in your bedroom if your companion was also in your bedroom, right?
Mhm.
Because you
I mean,
have to be within sight of each other.
sometimes if we were in the apartment, it was like, okay, like she's in the apartment, I'm in the apartment. The apartment is small enough that I can still hear her even if I can't directly see her.
Got
So
it.
yeah, like if you obviously can like go to the bathroom and shower and stuff alone, and then like, you know, if you get ready for bed. For the first 6 weeks of my mission, I was so tired that I was going to bed at like 9 p.m. every night. And my companion would stay up for another hour and talk to the other sisters, whatever. And it was like, we were in the same apartment, so she didn't have to be in the room with me.
Yeah.
But that was also like a kind of a, each companion interprets it differently kind of thing. So I had some companions that were extremely strict about that, and other companions that were like, yeah, I can see you, I can hear you, it's fine. So
yeah, so
depends.
that's kind of the other thing is that, you know, you're with this person 24/7, whether you get along or not, whether your personalities mesh or not. And you had some great companions and you had some not so great companions.
I did. I had a really amazing trainer who's still one of my best friends. And I was with her for the first 12 weeks. And then, I had 16 companions in 18 months, which is a lot.
Wow.
Usually you'd have the same companion for several months. But for me, the missions are divided up by transfers, which is a chunk of 6 weeks of time. So almost every transfer, I was getting a new companion. And I think part of that was because I was considered to be like a more, I don't know, interpret the law, not letter of the law kind of thing. Like, that's just kind of how I am. Like, I'm going to do what I want to do. So, like,
you come by that honestly.
Yeah, like, you know, I'm following the rules. Like, I'm not doing anything bad. I'm just, you know, I wasn't as strict about the rules. And so I had a lot of companions that were. But the other side of that coin is that I had the ability, and I feel like this is me tooting my own horn maybe, but like, I had the ability to connect with people on an emotional level that my companions a lot of times couldn't, because they were very like, these are the rules, this is the lesson that we have to teach, this is the way that we have to teach it, kind of thing. And I would just like go into their home and vibe. Like, what's the vibe? What do you need? Like, what kind of message would you like to hear from us today? Like, what do you need to talk about? I was just kind of like, whatever. And however long that takes is however long it takes. Like, I wasn't concerned about the schedule or time or whatever, but I had companions that were like, we've been here an hour, we have to go. And I was like, we're not done yet. Like, clearly they still have things that they want to talk about. And like, this is a great lesson that's going well. Like, let's just see where it goes. So like, it was difficult. I did have some companions that we got along great. Even if we weren't like best friends, we were kind to each other and we got along fine. But I had other companions that were hard to get along with, and one that was like mean. So it was just like, you don't get to pick. And I would always say, like, I can do anything for 6 weeks. Like, because oftentimes if I wasn't getting along with a companion, I knew that I wouldn't have to be with them for very long. So I would just let my mission president know in my emails every week, like, hey, sister so-and-so and I are not really getting along well, even though, you know, this is the work we're doing and this is how it's going. Just so you know, like, things aren't going well. And sometimes they would give you another companion, but sometimes not. I mean, you don't have any say in it.
Yeah. So going back to the daily schedule, so you had all of those hours of study time, and then was it basically lunchtime by the time you finished that?
Yeah, a lot of times it was, you know, after those hours, we would have lunch for an hour from noon to 1 usually. That wasn't like a hard and fast rule. It was just like, you get an hour for lunch, so take it whenever makes sense. So we would usually just stay in the apartment until 1 p.m. And then we would go teach our lessons. We would, you know, make appointments with people, or if we didn't have any appointments, then we would go finding.
Yeah, so talk about that. So if you didn't have a specific appointment that day, like let's say you just got to an area and there's nobody that's on the list to go teach,
Mhm.
talk about how you would have to go find people to teach.
Well, the best way for missionaries to find people to teach is to ask the current members if they have any referrals. If you have friends or family that want to hear about the gospel, that's always the best way for missionaries to find people to teach. But they would have whole like seminars and lessons for us on how to find. One of the least effective ways is by knocking doors, which is what usually people associate with missionary work is, they come, they knock on your door. But that's really not very effective, and it's a huge waste of time, and it really sucks. So I hated doing it, and I really didn't do it very often unless we just had absolutely nothing else to do. But usually, where I would start is by looking at the ward list and seeing if there were like any inactive members or part member families that we could ask if they would like to have a lesson. Sometimes we would go out into public places and like set up a table. There were some missionaries that are on college campuses that often like set up a table for people to come and ask them questions. A lot of times we would do service projects, and that would introduce us to people in the community that we would find and teach. So it was a lot of that kind of stuff. Like, where can we be? Where can we be around a lot of people? Where can we be where we can strike up conversations with people in the community? And sometimes people would just see your missionary tag and not know the missionaries, and they'd want to know, like, who are you guys? What are you doing? And you would just tell them, like, all the time, like, we're missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We have a message to share with you about the gospel of Jesus Christ. There was like all of these like phrases that you could say to kind of start a conversation with somebody.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that one of your companions had a really good idea of like a sticky note board or something can you describe that?
Yeah, so my first area that I was in Humboldt County, up in Eureka, and which is pretty well known to be like a lot of people grow weed up there. So there's a lot of drugs and drug paraphernalia and people on drugs, but they had this community event like every first Saturday or something, where like all the local businesses did special things and whatever. So we set up a table. This was in November, so it was like around Thanksgiving time. We set up a table with like a trifold board that had a tree on it, and people would come to the table and write. We had these sticky notes that were shaped like leaves, and they would write on a sticky note what they were grateful for and put it on the tree. Because we were talking, it was like Thanksgiving time, talking about thankfulness. And then like while they were at our table, we would talk to them like, yeah, we're the missionaries. Like we would have little pamphlets or like things that they could look through. Sometimes we would get appointments from those things. Can we come to your home and share a message with you? Can we come to your home and pray with you? Can we come to your home and bless your home? That's like a thing that missionaries do sometimes. So yeah, it was stuff like that.
Yeah, just a way to start a conversation, like anything to get to talk to people.
Yes.
And then after dinner, you would go back to your apartment?
Sometimes we had to be back in the apartment by 9 p.m. at the latest.
Okay.
So it just would depend on what time we had dinner and how long we were there. Our mission did have a rule that we had to keep it to an hour, unless you were teaching a lesson. So a lot of times we would just teach a lesson and then we could be there as long as we wanted. But there were some times where I had companions that were very like crazy about the rules, and so we would leave after an hour or very shortly after an hour. Sometimes we would have appointments with people in the evening, because a lot of people are home from work and stuff, and so sometimes we had evening appointments after dinner. But most of the time, especially when I was in areas where the sun went down really early, once the sun was down, nobody wants to talk to you. Like if it's dark outside, they don't want to talk to a stranger, which is totally understandable.
Right.
So there was like in the wintertime when I was in Eureka, we would just go home after dinner because we weren't going to talk. We weren't going to find anybody to teach. So there was a rule in my mission that we had to talk to 20 people, teach 3 lessons, and invite one person to be baptized every single day. They called it the 23-1.
Wow.
Talk to 20 new people, teach 3 lessons, invite one person to baptism every day, and we had to keep track of those numbers and report them. So if we didn't have our 20 contacts, my companion would drag me to the Target parking lot and like talk to people as they were getting out of their cars and like hand them cards and then count them as a person that we talked to.
Wow.
I mean, she was nuts.
And it varies by mission, right?
It does. Yeah, that was a mission specific rule.
Yeah, and you had two very different mission presidents,
right,
on your mission. So this first one was very strict and very numbers oriented. So did you have to report those numbers every day?
Yes. So my first mission president, and I will say part of the reason that they were so strict with us is because we were the very first mission in the church to get iPads as teaching tools. And with the introduction of technology, there's always the potential for it to be abused, right? And so they were wanting us to be very vigilant and very, very obedient. And so we could only use the iPads. Like they had this monitoring software on them. So we could only download certain apps. We weren't allowed to have like our own iCloud email. It was only our missionary email, which was also monitored. We used the iPad for like our area book, and we were allowed to use it to email our families, but only during specific times. So I got in trouble a couple of times for emailing on a day that wasn't P Day.
I didn't think about this aspect of it, but your missionary email was your name at
myldsmail.net.
Yes, my LDS mail. So I didn't really think about this, but yeah, they absolutely did monitor your email, right? I mean, they read everything that you sent out and everything that you got in. I mean I don't know if they did read everything.
I don't know if they did. Yeah.
So if there was a missionary that they were like, quote unquote, having trouble with or something like that, they probably did go into their email and see who have they been emailing, who's been emailing them, have people been sending them things. So I remember we sort of got off on this tangent because we were talking about mailing things to you. So when you're at the Santa Rosa Mission, but you could be in any one of these different areas at different apartments. And I think it was very rare for me to have the address of the actual apartment you were at.
I would always try and give it to you, so it was easier for you to send me mail directly. But especially packages, they like for you to send them to the mission office first.
That was the rule, right? Was to send them to the mission office. And that was a way sort of controlling, like, what were you being sent and stuff like that. And then also, like, I didn't think about this when you were out there, but if there had ever been some kind of emergency where you called me and you were like, I need you right now, like, I need to come home right now, I wouldn't have had your address in some cases. Like, I wouldn't have known exactly where you were or how to find you other than to go to the mission office. So I literally, as a parent, would have had to, there was somebody that I was supposed to contact for emergency stuff, I remember. And so I had to go through them to get to you. So you had a cell phone, but it wasn't a smartphone. I assume you knew my phone number.
Yeah, I mean, I memorized your phone number. So I could have called you, and I did a couple of times for like medical things or like, but we weren't allowed to just call our parents whenever we wanted, you know, and you're sharing a phone between your companion, you and your companion.
Oh, yeah.
So your companion is also seeing who you're texting and calling. The phone is plugged in at night, usually in the living room or something like that. So
you, at this time, you were only allowed to call me on Mother's Day and Christmas. Right. And we were able to have a FaceTime. But other than that, we were only allowed to email once a week. And I remember there was a time where you weren't getting my emails for some reason. I think it was when you first got out there and you said something like, are you sending me stuff because I'm not getting it? I can't remember what the problem was, but I remember it was like at least the first couple of weeks that I was sending you emails and you weren't getting them.
Yeah, so, I don't remember that, but yeah, they definitely control your communication.
And it sounds like they were keeping you so busy as a means of controlling your behavior, like keeping you out of trouble, basically.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you were expected to have a full appointment book, and if you didn't, you were finding people to teach. And every night when you would get back to the apartment, your district leader or zone leader. So usually if you're in an area that's farther away, like when I was in Eureka, there are like 12 missionaries assigned to that area. And then there's a district leader who's in charge of all those missionaries, an elder. And then there's a zone leader who's in charge of several districts. So the district leader would call us every night and get our numbers for the day. How many people did you talk to? What lessons did you have? Did you invite anybody to baptism? They would just check in on us. How are you guys doing? Do you need anything? Some of my district leaders were really awesome and we became good friends. And some of them were just very like business to the point. I don't want to hear about your day. I just want to get your numbers. And that was it. So it just kind of depended on the situation.
Yeah. And then you had a companion that was sick for a lot of the time. And then you also, I remember you had migraines a lot. And so how would you handle that? Like if one of you was too sick to go out and you couldn't hit your numbers, how did you deal with that?
You just stay inside. I mean, it sucks to be the person that's sick, that's keeping somebody else in the apartment all day long is like the worst thing ever. And being sick is also the worst thing ever because you can't do anything. You can read your scriptures. You can, read your conference talks on your iPad. You can maybe write letters or, read letters. You
couldn't listen to music either unless it was like the approved stuff.
It had to be church approved. And so some missions have like only uplifting music and that's very vague. And then there are some, my first mission president was only Mormon Tabernacle Choir. You could only listen to Motab or hymns.
Yeah.
So it just depended. Yeah. And there were some apartments that I was in that had those little DVD players, those portable DVD players. And we would watch like training videos or like videos that we would use to teach people. And when I was a missionary, they had these things called Mormon messages on LDS.org where you could like use somebody's spiritual experience to teach a certain lesson or whatever. So we watched the Mormon messages and conference talks and whatever else. And you're just in the apartment feeling crappy. And if it was really serious, then you would call the mission doctor we had a senior missionary in our mission who just lived there. She lived in the area and she was like a nurse. And she was the person that you would call and say, hey, this is what's going on with me. And she would either look at you personally or she would refer you to somebody. She would make you an appointment with a doctor and say, like, you can go to this place kind of thing. So
was there a time when I vaguely remember this, when you had a companion that was sick for an extended period of time and then so you went out with some different sisters while she stayed in the apartment? Or was that not allowed?
You could do that if you found somebody to be with her. So like she couldn't be there by herself. So if we could get a member, we could say, hey, like sister so-and-so is sick. Would you mind hanging out at our apartment with her while I go out and teach lessons? But that was very rare because most people are not available during the day, especially women, to just like sit in your apartment and spend time with a sister missionary, And we honestly, I felt bad about asking members to do stuff like that because they're busy. Like they have lives and kids and jobs and all, all that stuff. And like missionary work was my life 24/7 full time, but for them, it was like something that they could do if they had extra time. So I always felt bad asking members to do stuff like that with us.
Yeah. So tell us about P-Day, because P-Day was your day off once a week, right? And tell us about the rules and expectations for that.
So you're expected to still keep the missionary schedule. So once a week on Mondays, for us it was Mondays, you were allowed to do all your chores, like your laundry, email home, do any grocery shopping, like that kind of stuff. But we still had to keep our missionary schedule. So we still had to get up at 6:30, do our exercise. We still had to do our personal study and companionship study. So our P-Day didn't start until we were done with all that stuff at 9 a.m. And then we had chores, like we had to get the car washed. We had to clean the apartment. And in the apartments that I lived in, there was like a checklist. So it was like, sister so-and-so will do this, sister so-and-so will do this. And we would kind of divide it up that way so that we were all helping to clean. Because a lot of times I wasn't in an apartment with just my companion. We would live with another set of sisters or even two sets. There was a couple times that I lived in a townhouse that had 6 sisters in it. But we would kind of try and divide the work up evenly, but we weren't allowed to go do anything until our chores were done. So we had to clean the house and clean the car. Then you could go do your emails. We had to go somewhere where there was Wi-Fi because we didn't have Wi-Fi in our apartments. So we had to go to the church or to the library or to an internet cafe where there's Wi-Fi, do our emailing for the week, and then find somewhere to do our laundry if we didn't have laundry in the apartment. So there were a couple of places where we would go to a member's house to do our laundry. There was a couple of apartments I lived in where we did have laundry in the unit, but we were only allowed to do our laundry on Monday. So even though we had a washer and dryer in the apartment, they still only let us do it on Mondays, which was so frustrating to me.
Yeah, I bet.
So you have to do all of that, all your chores, all your shopping for the week, all that stuff. And then if you have extra time, you can maybe do a fun activity with the other missionaries or as a companionship. And we tried to do those things. A lot of times we would rush all that stuff in the beginning of the day so that we could like go to the beach for a couple of hours, or we would like go on a hike, or, you know, like there were a few things that we could do, but most of the time we just ended up at the church playing basketball and emailing because the church had Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
And then by dinner time, you're a missionary again because you usually have a dinner appointment at 5:00. So
yeah, so there's not a whole lot of time to get your personal stuff done. Was there ever a temptation on P-Day to like skip those study hours so that you had more time to get stuff done?
Absolutely. And there were missionaries I knew that didn't do it. It just depended on your companionship. If you and your companion both agreed, this is dumb and I don't want to do it, then you didn't do it. And I had a couple companions that were a lot more lax about that kind of stuff. They were like, the apartment's clean, we're clean people, it's not filthy. Like sometimes we would clean the bathroom and then be like, it's good. Like,
yeah,
because everything else is fine, you know? So it just depended, but there were definitely elders I knew of that I was friends with that didn't ever do any of those chores. And,
yeah.
you know.
And it always surprised me when you would send pictures of you and the other missionaries like out doing fun things on P-Day, because I remember thinking like, how do you even have time to travel anywhere or to, you know, to go, and you had to stay within the mission boundaries, right?
Unless you got special permission to leave, you couldn't go outside the mission boundary. Yeah. So even though San Francisco was right across the Golden Gate Bridge from us, we were not allowed to go over the bridge. So
not cross the bridge.
You do not cross the bridge. That was the hard and fast rule. There were some elders in my mission that got in serious trouble, and one of them got sent home because they went on like a nighttime excursion across the bridge to do something.
Scandalous.
Yeah, super scandalous.
I think almost every time that I've heard of a missionary doing something like that or getting in trouble on their mission, it was because they either went outside the boundaries or went outside the boundaries of the mission to do something secular, touristy, something like that, and ended up getting into trouble somehow or something like that.
Yeah.
Did you have situations like that where people got sent home for seemingly minor infractions, or were they usually big things?
There was one elder I knew that got sent home and then came back, which was a big deal because usually if you get sent home, you don't come back.
Yeah.
But he got sent home because he went over the bridge, and I don't know what they did. They're probably just taking pictures on the bridge. I mean, like, they're 18-year-old boys, like,
right.
You know, Mormon boys. Like, what are they going to be doing?
Right.
But the only times I heard of somebody getting sent home, it was for something pretty major. Like, I don't know, they had their own personal cell phone that they had been using, or like they were dating somebody within the mission, or, you know, like stuff like that. Yeah. And there was always those rumors, and like you hear stories about that kind of stuff and gossip about things, but like you never really know if that actually happened or if it's just like a story that's been sensationalized.
Sure.
But yeah, it was things like that you would get in trouble for. Having romantic feelings for another missionary, that kind of thing. So like, if you think about it from a secular perspective, like those things are not a big deal. But in the Mormon church and in, you know, the mission, those things were a big deal.
Yeah. And I was going to say too, when you were talking about the list of chores, you were required to call your companion's sister.
Yes.
You guys weren't allowed to use each other's first names.
Nope.
And you were required to call the young men elder so-and-so.
Elder, your last name, sister, your last name.
Did you guys ever know each other's first names or just?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we
But
would
just
talk
weren't allowed
about
to use
it.
them.
We weren't allowed to use them. Yeah. So
Yeah.
a lot of times I would just say like hermana, or, I'd just like shorten it, sister, like, can you grab me this or whatever, that kind of thing. But when you're introducing yourself or introducing your companion to somebody, this is sister so-and-so, this is elder so-and-so, and we had these books where like if you were leaving an area, you would sign each other's little book and you'd say like, it was great to serve with you, blah, 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 blah. Here's my social media handle, love, Braden Tafua, and then you'd be like, oh, that's his first name. That's so cool, kind of thing. But you would never call a missionary by their first name.
Yeah. So sometimes they were like leaving the mission before you even knew what their name was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then the other thing I wanted to talk about was maybe you can talk just a little bit about zone conferences and what that was like. And then I want to talk about the differences between your two mission presidents and how that changed things for you.
So zone conferences happened once every transfer. On Tuesdays in my mission, we would have a district meeting. So after we would do all of our studies, we would usually go to the church and all the missionaries in our district would meet, and we would have like an hour or two of training or instruction from our district leader. And sometimes those were fun, and sometimes they were just like a thing to check off the list. It just depended on the district you were in and whether you were friends with people or not. So we would have district meetings every Tuesday, and then once every 6 weeks, we would have a zone meeting with all the missionaries in your area, which was usually like a few dozen. It just depended on where you were. So sometimes a zone would be like 6 districts, but they would usually have us meet at a nearby church building that was like kind of equidistant for everybody. So sometimes it was like an hour away or whatever, because my mission boundary was really big. Not every mission is as big as mine, but almost everybody in my mission had a car. There were only a few sets of companionships that were on bikes.
Yeah. And I remember you saying that, so once every 6 weeks was it a zone conference?
Yeah, zone conference, yeah.
That you went to? And didn't you have to like pack up all of your belongings just in case you were getting transferred that time? Like
no, that's a transfer meeting. That's different.
Okay. You had to pack up all of your stuff and take it with you in case you were being transferred that time. And you didn't know if you were getting transferred until you got there. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So zone meetings are all of the districts locally. The mission president comes to the zone meeting with his wife, and any senior missionaries that are in the area as well. And they do like a whole day of different like breakout sessions and instruction and lessons. And those things would be like how to find people to teach, dress and grooming standards, how to teach the gospel blesses families, how to teach the first vision. Like there was a different theme every time. Then there was usually like a testimony meeting where everybody would share their testimony. And then like missionaries that were leaving soon would give like their departing talk to everybody else. We would have a meal and then usually go to like our dinner appointments. So that was a zone meeting, and you would always have a one-on-one meeting with the mission president during your zone meeting. Usually those were like very short, how are you doing? And it was by yourself. Your companion had to wait outside the door. He would check in with you. How are you doing? How's the work? Who are you teaching? Is there anything that you need? Or he would like refer to something that you may have emailed him. I read in your email that you said this. How is that going? Kind of thing. So he's like checking in with you. That was where you would bring up any problems that you were having. So that was a zone meeting. And then a transfer meeting was once every 6 weeks. In my mission, thankfully, we had something called transfer doctrine, where every 6 weeks they would send out a PDF with all of the missionaries and who was leaving and where they were going. And we would get that the night before. So you would like find yourself, am I going anywhere? And then you would also find like your friends, like, oh, so-and-so is going to this place. And oh, I'm going to be with this person. I love her, kind of thing. So you would kind of figure out like, okay, am I leaving? Do I need to pack my stuff tonight? Kind of thing. But you always have to be ready. By the end of that 6 weeks, you have to be ready to pack your stuff, because you don't know if you're going to be leaving until the night before usually. And then there was a couple of transfers where they didn't send that out and they just called you the night before and said, hey, you're leaving. and they
Wow.
didn't tell you where you were going. So you would show up to the meeting that morning and they'd say, you're going to this place. But they only did that to us a couple of times because it's so stressful. It's
Yeah.
like, I think they were trying to like eliminate all of the gossiping and things that happen when you know so-and-so is going to this place, and like the speculation and stuff. Yeah, most of the time you wouldn't know.
Because sometimes people would be transferred just as a course of business, but other times people would get transferred for a reason. And so I'm sure there was sometimes speculation about why a certain person was being sent to a certain place or being sent away from a certain place.
Yes, that happened to me. Yeah. So when I went down to San Rafael, I went there because in my previous area, there was an elder that had expressed having romantic feelings for me. So they moved me out of that area and down into San Rafael. And the sister that had been there that I replaced was super mad at me and hated me because that was her very first area and she wanted to stay in it longer. And she got moved somewhere else and I replaced her. So that was like a big deal, and there was some animosity there. Later on, we were companions and we had to work that out, but we never really did. So yeah, like there's always speculation of like somebody got emergency transferred, they would call it, like if you were moved.
Yeah.
And any other time besides a transfer meeting, if you got moved, that was called an emergency transfer. People would gossip about why that may be or whatever. So yeah. Or if somebody got sick and had to go home, then their companion would be emergency transferred somewhere else. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So the difference between your two mission presidents, because the first one I remember was very, very strict, and I would say lacked compassion on some levels. Would you say
I would
that's
say that
true?
too. I would say that too. He was very rigorous. He was very concerned with us being obedient. It was my second area and like my fourth companion or something, and she was in her last transfer. She was about to go home, and she was like bullying me. Like she was mean. And I told him, like, I remember telling we had, forgot about this, we had sister training leaders, who's basically the female equivalent of a zone leader. So I had a meeting with my sister training leader, and I was telling her how hard of a time I was having with my companion, because we sometimes throughout the transfer you would have an exchange, is what they would call it, where you would go to another person's area and they would go to yours, so you would have a different companion for a night. And so I was on an exchange with my sister training leader, and I was telling her I'm having a really hard time with this sister. She's really not nice to me. You know, she was constantly putting me down for like the things that I was wearing. You can't wear that, you can't say that, you're not allowed to, you know, you don't care about the rules, like you're not as, all this stuff. It was really mean. She would lay in bed at night in our bunk beds and just tell me all the things that I did wrong that day. But not to my face. It was like in the middle of the night. Like she would say it into the darkness.
So you guys would be laying there in bed with the lights off, and she would say, Sister Iden, I just want to tell you, I really think that you were terrible today.
I mean, yes, not in so many words, but yes. She'd be like, I noticed that you said XYZ, and that's not really something that we're supposed to say as missionaries, and whatever, you know, fill in the blank. It was so just demoralizing and frustrating.
And you had no choice but to sit there and listen to it, because
I'm in my bed.
Like
I can't leave, you know.
It's not like you could put your headphones in or something.
No,
you know?
Yeah, that was hard. So I told my sister training leader how hard of a time I was having with her. She told my mission president, and then my mission president sent me an email and said, Sister Iden, I hear that you hate your mission and that you want to go home. And, you know, I think that if you don't want to be here, then you should leave, because we only want missionaries that want to teach the gospel. I mean, it was, and I actually have a copy of this email still, because they gave me, you know, the printouts of all the emails that we sent back and forth. So I still have it, and it was harsh. It was very harsh.
I do remember you emailing me and telling me about this problem with your mission president, and I remember just being horrified that, you know, here my kid is out, you know, away from their family and in need of somebody who can show them kindness, and she's basically just being told she's not good enough because she's having a difficult time with a companion.
Right. Well, and it was also just, I felt like a huge breach of trust and confidence in this sister training leader that I thought was my friend, that I thought I could confide in. And then she just went and tattled on me to the mission president. And I mean, it was just so juvenile. It was so juvenile and demoralizing. So I would say, my first mission president lacked compassion. He was very like letter of the law. These are like, we had our white handbook with our missionary rules, but we also had a whole list of mission specific, do's and don'ts. We do not wear this. We do not say this. We stay in these appointments for this amount of time. I mean, it was like so much. All of the like the 23-1, that was his, thing.
Yeah.
Exercising, like we had to exercise in the morning, but in our mission with that mission president specifically, it was you had to be outside of the apartment either walking or running. You couldn't do anything else for your exercise, which was mission specific. And then later on I had a different mission president that was just like, exercise however you want, I don't care. So it was rough. So that was the first 9 months of my mission. And then the second 9 months I had another mission president. And it was like the exact opposite. Like he was like Santa Claus. He was just like this jolly, chubby, super nice guy. He had been a lawyer. He was a retired lawyer. He had like 10 kids. And he was very like spirit of the law. Like you would say, am I allowed to do this? And he would just say like, what does the handbook say? And you'd say, well, it says this. And he says, great. So interpret that however you want. Like.
Did he have any of his kids out with him as a serving mission president?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. His youngest 2 children lived at the mission home with him, but they were like teenagers.
Okay.
One of them was preparing to go on his mission, and one of them was like her sophomore year of high school or something.
Yeah.
And they were from Arizona, so they moved to Santa Rosa, and they were in the mission home. And a mission president's tenure is 3 years. So.
Yeah. So the parents had a Facebook group. And there was I can't remember who it was that invited me to the Facebook group, but I guess the mission president's wife sort of organized that and set it up and then put a parent in charge of it. And so there was a parent who was in charge of contacting the new missionaries' families that were coming in. And you got invited to this group. It was a private group. And people would put updates in there about like, if your missionary sent you pictures of everybody on a P day, they would upload those pictures so that every parent could see like, oh, there's my kid in that picture and whatever. The mission president's wife would also like send updates about what was happening in the area. I remember there were some scary fires at one point that we got updated about. And then at one point there was a pretty serious car accident that was involving some of the missionaries. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that was in my first area. So we were on a blitz is what they would call it. So you would go, it was like all the missionaries in the district would go to one companionships area and teach a bunch of people and find a bunch of people for like the whole day. So we were on a blitz. We were coming back to the church, and 2 companionships. So there was 4 elders in this car were hit by a drunk driver at like 3 p.m. And, it was a really serious accident, and it was right down the street from the church building. And like half of us were already at the church building. Some of us witnessed it. I mean, it was really scary. And I think you were in the Facebook group and you heard that there was an accident in Eureka, but you didn't know whether or not I was injured or not.
Right. Yeah. And I knew it was right. I knew it was right where you were. And one of the parents made a post in the Facebook group that was like the news story.
Yeah, the local
that
news
was getting reported. And I remember, I think it was like during the school day or just after the school day had ended. And I remember just like sequestering myself in my office and like posting in the group and saying who you were and like asking if anybody knew about your safety and like, was anybody companions with you? And I remember going to the news website and looking at the pictures of the accident and like looking at the people who were standing around and like zooming in to see if I could tell who that was and was it you? And like, I think I remember seeing a picture where like there was a female in the background that sort of looked like it might be you. And I remember like zooming in to see like, do I recognize the dress? And like, is that your hair and all of that kind of stuff? And it was so blurry that I couldn't really see. And I just remember being frantic for a while because I knew it was a very serious accident. I could see somebody was being loaded onto a stretcher. That didn't look like you. So I was like, okay, that's not my daughter being on the stretcher, but are there more people involved? It was just a frantic, like, I want to know what's going on, but I couldn't call you. You couldn't call me. You know, I could send you an email that said, gee, I sure hope you weren't in that horrible accident that just happened.
Yeah, I didn't even know that you would have known about it or been concerned about it. And it was like midweek, so I wasn't going to send you another email until Monday.
Yeah.
One of the elders had to be life flighted down to Santa Cruz to like a specialty surgery center or something. And he ended up going home for a few months and then coming back when he was recovered, which was crazy. But it was really scary.
I just remember it being hours and hours and hours before I was able to confirm that you were not in the accident. And I think somebody finally posted in the parents' Facebook group, not the name of the elder, but that it was an elder companionship who had been hit. And that one of them, they did tell us he was life flighted, and the other one went to the local hospital, and they both were in stable condition. But I remember it being almost the middle of the night before I got that information. So it was like 6 or 7 hours of me wondering whether you had been in a horrible accident or not. And not being able to confirm. You know, I'm sure if it had been you, at least I hope that they would have contacted me right away. Like if they had sent you to the hospital.
I'm sure they would have. Yeah.
But just knowing that it was in your area and not knowing whether you were okay, not being able to contact you, that was really scary.
Yeah. I'm sure that was, as a mom, like, yeah. And I feel dumb because I literally like could have just sent you a text. But like, you know, you're not supposed to use your missionary phone for your own personal whatever. So now
it's against the rules.
It's against the rules. Yeah. Like you could get in trouble for doing that. Now missionaries each have their own cell phones. They come into the mission with it and they're allowed to call home whenever they want. Yeah. But 10 years ago, that was not the case.
Yeah.
Which is hard.
Yeah.
It was very hard.
So there was a lot that was hard about the mission for you and for us too, but mostly for you, I think. I mean, we were trying to just support you as best we could out here. It was hard to be without you. I remember the kids posing at Christmas time in front of the Christmas tree, holding a picture of you with sad faces on, you know, wishing that you were there with us. And I remember just like sending you packages for Christmas and birthday and trying to make sure that those days were still special and being concerned about you. You know, being in good places. And there were some really good members in your area who would contact me and let me know how you were doing and talk about how much they loved you. And there was even one guy when you were getting ready to leave your mission, I remember you had a ton of stuff. And for whatever reason, he was driving to San Antonio and he let you load up a bunch of your stuff in his car. And I remember meeting him in a parking lot off of the freeway so that he could give me your stuff. So you had some good people that were taking care of you. And that brought me a lot of comfort. But do you want to talk about sort of towards the end of your mission, how things started to get more difficult and you coming home and all of that?
I mean, we could do a whole other podcast episode about like the mental health aspect of missionary work. Yeah. But just to keep it short, I was severely depressed on my mission and I didn't know it. I mean, people weren't really talking about depression as a diagnosis. There wasn't a lot of language at that time, at least not where I was. So I knew of like one missionary that had a diagnosis for depression and was on meds. That was like one missionary out of several hundred that I knew of. So I remember talking to a sister that I was good friends with, maybe halfway through my mission, 9 months, 10 months out, and telling her, like, these are the things that I'm really struggling with. Like, I just don't feel like myself. Like, it was like all of the classic symptoms of depression. And she was like, well, maybe you should talk to, the mission nurse or the mission psychiatrist, because she had just talked to them about her mental health, and she kind of encouraged me to talk to somebody about it. So I went to the mission nurse and I kind of explained all the things that were going on with me, and she sent me to the mission psychiatrist, who I don't think he was employed by the church, but I think he was just like the person that she would refer to for mental health stuff. So I remember going to his office, and he had like this list of intake questions or whatever. And at the end of that meeting, he told me that I was manic, that I was seriously depressed, and that I should go home and be meeting with a therapist like once a week. He was like, you are not doing well. Like, you can't be here anymore. And I just remember thinking, like, no, like, I've come so far. I can't just go home in the middle. Like, I'm not going to quit. So, and I told the mission nurse that, and she said, well, I can have you meet with somebody else. So then I met with an LDS Family Services, like, counselor. I don't know what his credential was, but I don't think he was like a psychiatrist.
He probably was an LPC, but not able to write prescriptions.
So I met with him, and because he was a member and because he, had served a mission, he was like, if this is what you're experiencing, I can give you a couple of tools and things that you can do to get you through, but you really should consider going home. And if you don't go home, you need to get mental health help when you get home, kind of thing.
Yeah. And at this point, you were how many months away from finishing the full 18-month mission?
I think I was a little over halfway. So I had maybe 6 or 7 months left, maybe 8 months. So I was like, I can do anything for 8 months, like, I can do this. But the thing that was hard is that I've always had chronic migraines. Like, even when I was growing up, I would get these migraines really bad that would, I'd be in bed for a couple of days, light sensitivity, all of the things. And on those days that I would get these migraines, I wouldn't be able to go out with my companions. I wouldn't be able to teach lessons. And so I was just like in the apartment, in my head, spiraling and just having these like depressed, like, episodes. I don't know, like, it was scary. Like, I had a lot of these really dark, I was never suicidal. I didn't have any suicidal ideation, but I had like a lot of just really dark, like, I felt like Satan was personally attacking me. And you always hear, and this is something that we haven't talked about yet, but you always hear that, like, Satan works the hardest on his most righteous soldiers or whatever,
Right.
like you're going to face adversities within your mission. And that's how you know you're doing the right thing, is because Satan's going to work so hard on you. And so I felt like I'm being personally attacked by Satan. Like, I was having all of these very dark, very depressed feelings. I would get priesthood blessings from my district leader or my zone leader often, like blessings of healing, but also blessings of comfort, because I was just feeling so, down and depressed, and it was really horrible and hard. And
add on top of that, the pressure you were already feeling to be a good example as the oldest kid, as the most faithful kid, quote unquote. And add on top of that as well, the huge stigma that there is in the church culture about coming home early from a mission,
right,
for any reason, because people are always going to speculate that it was a worthiness issue, that
right,
you did something you weren't supposed to do. And I remember just there being this sort of catty culture of like, oh, they got sent home for health reasons. Sure,
yes,
that's what it
was.
Like,
they always treat you like you're making it up.
Yeah, exactly. And especially if it was a mental health thing, like, okay, if somebody broke their leg and needed to get medical treatment and come home to heal their broken leg, sure, that was sort of acceptable. It was still kind of frowned upon, but it was still acceptable. But for mental health reasons, that felt like an excuse. It's like, you shouldn't do that. And I didn't ever personally feel that way, but I know that that's how the culture
That's how you're treated. Yeah.
Yeah. And also because talking to other, people in the ward, at Relief Society meetings or baby showers or whatever, like, sisters in the church, like members of the church, that's what they talk about all the time, is like whose kid is going on a mission, whose kid is not going on a mission, even though they're old enough, and why not, whose kid is getting ready to get married in the temple. They were going to get married in the temple, but now they have to wait. People would speculate about that. Like that, this is what the women in the church spend their time talking about in social circles. And I always hated it so much because there was no kindness or compassion in it. There was no like making room for people's individuality or their personal circumstances or anything. And so there's a lot of pressure for you as a missionary to put on yourself to say, I can stick it out. I can stay. I can finish this out. I should be able to get over this. And so I'm just feeling a lot of, I don't know, anger that that's the way the culture is, because that's not what you needed at the time. What you needed at the time was someone to tell you, you should go home and it's okay for you to go home.
Right. Yeah. So eventually, I mean, it just got worse and worse as the months went by. And it got to the point where I was in my last area with my last companion. It was my last transfer. And it got to the point where I was completely disassociating during like lessons and stuff. My brain was in another place. Like I wasn't able to engage with the people we were teaching. I wasn't able to receive revelation. I wasn't like all those things that I had been relying on my whole mission to be a good and effective teacher and to connect with people and communicate, because it's a very intimate thing. Like somebody's spirituality and their testimony and their feelings about things, like that's a very intimate thing, and it's emotionally very draining to be having those conversations all day every day and giving so much of yourself. And I got to the point where I just couldn't do it anymore. I felt like it wasn't being fair to, and my companion was so sweet. I just love her to pieces. I was sick a lot, either with migraines or other ailments. And I was also just mentally unwell. And so it just got to the point where I just couldn't do it anymore. And I was just sobbing. And I remember calling you, like I was using my missionary cell phone. I called you and I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like I was just sobbing and sobbing. I remember I was in the car with my companion. We were outside of our apartment. And I was just like, I don't remember what I said to you or if you remember, but I just remember this feeling of like, I need to come home. I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
I was at a breaking point for sure.
I do remember. I actually was, I was at a high school judging a solo competition. It was a Saturday. And I remember going out for the lunch break and talking to you on the phone and just crying with you and just being supportive. Just telling you, I remember telling you, it's okay for you to come home. And if you need to come home, it's okay. Like, I still love you. You're still, you're still you. I'm still proud of you. I'm still, I was trying to comfort you and just make you feel like it was okay. And I sort of hate myself for this, but after I got off the phone with you, the person who was running the competition happened to be LDS. And she happened to be, a good friend of mine that we sang together and everything like that. And I came back from lunch and clearly was like, crying, red face, red eyes and all of that stuff. And she was like, are you okay? What's going on? And I said, I just talked to my daughter and she's going to be coming home from her mission early. And I feel terrible about myself that I felt like I had to do this, but I felt like I had to justify it to her. You know, I was like, she's been having a really hard time for a really long time. Her mental health is suffering. She's just at a breaking point. Her mission president has said it's okay. She's going to be released honorably, that kind of stuff, those kind of
after
excuses.
I called you, I called my mission president and told him, like, I can't, this is what I've been dealing with. I can't do it anymore. And he was like, go home. Like, it's fine. Because I was within like 2 or 3 weeks of being finished. And he was like, you've served an honorable mission. Like, you've served a full mission. It's totally okay. You can go home. Like, and I think that was Saturday and I flew home on Wednesday. Like they bought me a flight and I went home, and he was very kind to me. I had like my departing interview and I had a departing dinner with him and his wife, and he brought one of my favorite companions who's still one of my very best friends. He pulled her from another area and brought her with him to the dinner so that she could be there to say goodbye to me, because she's from New Zealand. So it's like, I'm not going to see her anytime soon, you know?
Yeah,
So he
I remember
brought
that.
her to say goodbye to me. And he was very kind. I never felt less than. I never felt like I'm being dishonorably released. Like, he was very, very sweet to me about it, which I am so thankful for, because that could have gone totally differently.
Yeah, for sure. And going back and reading through some of the emails just really briefly earlier today, I was remembering that towards the end of your mission, as you were getting ready to come home, you were doing things like trying to apply for school and trying to apply for jobs. And one of your best friends was getting married and you were trying to figure that timing out. Like,
Yeah.
people don't understand that, like, when you get off your mission, you don't just come home and then re-enter life. It's like you're trying to re-enter life while you're still out there with this crazy schedule. And you add on top of that, preparing for your next step in life.
It's very hard if you don't have like support for stuff like that. If you're lucky as a missionary, you would have somebody that like lines up a job for you right when you get home, or like does your school application for you so that you can, you know, some people will take a leave of absence from college. But if you're like applying for the first time, you have to take time out of your missionary day to do that. And when I was on my mission, there was actually a lot of talk about this, and they were piloting a new program called My Plan, where you would like prepare the last 6 weeks of your mission. You were doing this My Plan thing to prepare for your next step going home. How are you going to adjust back to normal life? Are you going to have a job? Are you going to go to school? What's dating going to be like for you? Like, they were trying to provide more support to missionaries so that they could be a little bit more prepared to go home. But there's really nothing like it. There's really nothing like coming home after spending so much time away and being so isolated and so ingrained in this, you know, gospel and culture and church stuff. I felt like an alien when I got home. It was so weird.
Yeah, because you now don't have all of these strictures. You don't have this set routine. You don't have to report on your day every single day. You get to be alone. You know, you get to go to the movies. You get to eat fast food. You get to have control over your own life again. And I know a lot of people who really have a hard time with that adjustment, you know. And the other thing is, so you fly in, we meet you at the airport. It's very
like
emotional.
a Wednesday night or something. Yeah.
You know, we brought balloons and flowers and stuff, and everybody was so excited to see you again. And there were lots of tears and hugs. And I remember, you know, the picture of you and your dad hugging. I think that's one of the few times that I really saw him emotional. You know, he didn't cry very much ever, but that reunion with you, like seeing how tight he hugged you, that was like, he really loved her.
It was sweet.
Yeah, it was really sweet. Yeah.
Well, it was crazy too, because Dad didn't send me very many emails on my mission. Like, you would email me every week, but it would always be like, this is what's going on with Dad. Dad says this kind of thing. And he only sent me a handful of emails that were from him. So we didn't communicate very much. So yeah, it was a big deal.
Yeah. And then I remember from the airport, we went to
the
church building because Rachel was there at like a church activity that she was in charge of or something. So she, for whatever reason, couldn't come to the airport with us, but we went into the church building. I remember her running into your arms and you guys, you know, having a big hug and everything. And then for a lot of missionaries, you're still a missionary until you officially get released by your priesthood leader.
Right.
And so can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah. So you're still expected, like, you know, in the airport, in the flight on the way home, even though you're by yourself, you're still expected to wear your missionary name tag, dress in missionary attire. You are a missionary until you get released. So for me, I flew home, I went to the airport, and then we went to the church building, and my stake president released me from my calling, because you're being called to be a missionary. So he releases you from your calling, and then you can be a normal person again. But for my husband, who was a missionary as well, his parents came to the mission to pick him up. So he was released by his local leader over Zoom, because they wanted to be able to go to Disneyland and do a bunch of stuff in the mission while he was still a missionary. And
Yeah.
they didn't want to have to deal with that, like, because they weren't going to be home for like another week or two. And so he got released over Zoom the night that his parents picked him up.
Another big cultural thing in the church is going to pick up your missionary from wherever they went on their mission.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a big deal that parents like go to the mission area, and you meet the mission president, you get to meet some of the members that they've been working with, and you get to see all of the sites in the area where they were. And
Mm-hmm.
like, I wanted to do that, but couldn't really afford to. And
Mhm.
also, like, I was in the middle of the school year. Do I fly? Do I drive? And I just
Yes.
remember thinking, like, this is a rite of passage as a parent that I'm probably never going to get to experience, is like picking up my kid from their mission.
Mhm.
And I felt too like it was sort of a braggy thing for a lot of women in the church, that like, oh,
Mhm.
we're going to pick up our son from his mission in Japan, and we're
Mhm.
going to stay for a couple of weeks. And it was like, that's great. I could never afford to do something like that,
Mhm.
and
Because
then
you're
having
already
you,
spending all this money to have your missionary out there. And
right,
then you're
right.
spending a bunch of money to go pick them up and have this amazing trip. And it's like a very privileged thing to be able to do.
Yeah. And then having you come home early, of course, that wasn't an option anyway. But I was just so
Mhm.
grateful to have you coming home, to where I could just like put my arms around you and like help
Mhm.
take care of you and all of that stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we could spend a lot of time talking about like the mental health and like support for mental health and missions and stuff like that. But it was hard. It was very, very hard. Like, I had a horrible pregnancy and an unmedicated birth, and I would still do that a million times over before I would ever go on a mission again, because it was so hard. And there were a lot of really good things that happened, within my
Yeah.
mission.
What were some of the
Well, I met my
What were some of the
husband
good
there.
things?
Bryson and I met on the mission. He's from Canada, so he was a Canadian missionary serving in the U.S. And we met there, and we were good friends, and we kind of served around each other our whole missions, and then came home within like a month of each other. He went back to Canada, I went back to Texas. We dated other people for over a year, and then got married later. So I met my husband there. I met a few of my very best friends. I mean, some of those girls that were my companions or sisters that I lived with are, we're still good friends with each other, even though we don't live close to each other. A lot of them live in Utah. But yeah, I mean, like, those relationships were great. I learned to rely on my feelings, because as a missionary, so much of what you do all day is like relying on the Spirit, paying attention to how you're feeling, following promptings, and so I think most of my life, especially as a teenager, I had kind of disassociated from my feelings and wasn't really used to paying that much attention. But I was able to kind of like exercise that muscle every day, all the time. And it's a skill, like having emotional awareness and being able to name that feeling and all those things like that. Those are emotional skills that I did not have before, that I was sort of forced into having,
Yeah.
So that was a positive thing that came out of it. I felt very confident after I got home from my mission, because I had just done something very hard. And I mean, it was a beautiful place to live. Like, a lot of missionaries don't get to experience the great parts of the place that they're in, but I was very privileged to be able to serve in some areas that were beautiful, and there were some very, very kind members that really took care of us, and they would text you pictures of us, or they'd take us out on hikes or to do fun things. They would feed us all the time. Like I said, I only had to feed myself dinner like maybe I could count on one hand the number of times in 18 months, because people just loved to feed the missionaries in our ward and wanted us to be there with them. So that was very nice and kind. And I wouldn't say that I was the most like effective missionary in terms of baptizing people. I could again count on one hand the number of baptisms that I had on my mission, but I spent a lot of time doing service projects and meeting with people that were no longer active in the church. And I got to meet a lot of very interesting, very colorful, like it wasn't all bad, you know, but I wouldn't do it again. And I wouldn't encourage my kid to go on a mission. Even with all the changes that they've made, sisters can wear pants now. You can have your own personal cell phone. You can call home whenever you want. You know, all of that stuff is really great. Those are positive changes, but I still don't think I would encourage anyone to go on a mission, mostly because they really do try to create this like robot. They want you to be a certain type of missionary that behaves a certain way, that dresses a certain way, that says certain things. And there's really just not a lot of room for individuality or, you know, receiving personal revelation. Like there's no room for interpretation of the rules or the commandments or whatever. I mean, it's very like they sort of treat you like you're less than if you don't get with the program kind of thing. And a few of my cousins have served missions in the recent past, and I've emailed them and just told them, like, you were called to that specific mission because you are you with all of your strengths and weaknesses and talents. I mean, like, the bottom line is that God knows who you are and where you need to be. And don't let anybody tell you that you need to be something that you're not. Because I think that that's like the most important thing that I would say to a missionary. So I guess for anybody that is not a member or maybe a post-Mormon or whatever, I would just say that, like, be kind to the missionaries because a lot of them are having a very hard time. And if you can, you know, pay for their groceries, feed them dinner, give them even just like a bottle of water if they come to your door. Like that's always really kind to do. A lot of them are naive and young and still trying to figure out if they actually believe it, you know, and it's hard.
Yeah. And it's not their fault, right? You know, as somebody who was born and raised in the church and my whole entire family are members, and it was this way a lot for you too. Like you get indoctrinated into the church culture from a very young age. It's the only thing that you know. You're told your entire life that it's the only way to live your life and that everybody else is wrong and that everybody else needs saving. Everybody else needs to be converted to this way because eventually they're going to be converted anyway, right? After Jesus comes, everybody's going to know that the Mormons were right about the way they lived their lives and everyone's going to do it eventually. So a lot of these young men and young women go on a mission out of this, you know, this cultural and familial expectation, whether they really want to or not. Some of them don't even know if they believe what they're teaching. And they have these expectations and rules from the mission president that they have to teach so many people a day. So I just would love it if we could sort of shift our thinking from missionaries. A lot of people are just super annoyed when they get contacted by the missionaries, whether it's out in public or in their own house. And I just hope that people can realize, number one, it's not their fault. Number two, they don't mean you any harm. And a lot of times they're doing this out of an expectation so that they can be acceptable in their families. So maybe we can now think about missionaries as just sort of people in need of our help rather than as an annoyance or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, a lot of them do believe it. Like they're happy and they want you to be happy as they are. They want you to be with your family forever. Like they truly, you know, it all comes from a good place. And that's the thing that I would say is to just give them the benefit of the doubt because some of them do just desperately want to share this message with you. And so what I've told the missionaries now when they contact me, and they do, is just, I'm happy to feed you anytime. If you need to share a message with me, I would love it if you could share something general that's not necessarily religious. Share something about kindness, share something, uplifting that you've read recently or heard or whatever. And if it has to be a gospel message, that's fine. I don't have any animosity about that. I tell them, like, I just don't want to be the ward project. I don't want you guys to be, coming here out of a sense of obligation because the bishop told you to check up on us. It's like, if you need my help, I'm so happy to feed you anytime. But, that's just a boundary that I have set for my family, and maybe other people feel differently. But yeah, I mean, it's just like a human thing, right? Like, just be kind to them, and if you're not interested in having them in your home, that's fine. Just smile and say, I'm not interested, but I hope you guys have a great day. Some people are really rude to missionaries, honestly, and
some people are, and slamming doors in faces and things like that. I mean, let's just be kind. At the minimum, let's be kind. And then if you are able, if you have the means to help them, to support them, to give them food or money or whatever it is, if you're able to, find out. I always ask them, do you feel safe?
Mm-hmm.
Are you okay? Do you have enough to eat? Is there something that I can do for you? And there was even a little group online that was talking about putting together like an escape hatch for missionaries who want to go home. But you have to, like, when you want to go home, you have to go through your mission president. And a lot of people just don't want to go through the sort of the hoovering of going into the missions president office and getting convinced to stay against your will,
Yeah.
And sometimes in foreign missions, they have to give their passport to the mission president and they don't get it back until it's time to go home. So, if you're able to help a missionary get home or something like that, anyway, I just want to say thanks for spending so much time with me today.
You're
and
welcome.
Thanks for unpacking all of this missionary stuff with me.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm happy to chat with you anytime.
It's so silly to say. I'm really glad that you went on a mission, but I, of course, at the time didn't know what I didn't know, of course,
Yeah, same. I mean, you just do the best you can with the information that you have at the time. And I think at that time in my life, I really did need, and this is kind of how I reconcile it now, is that, like, at that time in my life, I really did need the structure that the mission provided. I needed to feel acceptable. I needed to feel like what I was doing and where I was at in my life, I wanted to feel good about it. And being able to say, like, this is what God wants me to do. Like, nobody can argue with you about that, especially within the church. Like, if this is what you feel called to do and compelled to do, then do it, and at that time I really needed that. I needed that approval.
Yeah.
I needed to feel like I was doing the right thing. And I just don't need that in my life anymore, because I've grown so much as a person. But I think, like, at that time in my life, I was naive. I was hurting in a lot of ways. I had a lot of unresolved trauma, a lot of mental health that had not been addressed. I was not diagnosed with any of the things I'm diagnosed with now, even though they've been there for a long time. So, like, I just did the best that I could at the time. And I think it was something that ultimately was good for me, even though it was really difficult. So I don't have any, like, resentment or animosity. I think I just mostly feel sad for my past self and wish that I had had more resources, but now I can be that for somebody else that needs it, maybe,
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, the things that you learn through these difficult experiences, it sort of teaches you who you are as a person.
Sure.
And I think that who you are as a person is just a very strong and kind, compassionate person. You're smart. You're a great mom. You're a wonderful wife. And you're just a spectacular human being. I appreciate you so much.
That's sweet of you to say. I think the same thing about you.
I'm grateful that you're my first waffle.
I'm grateful to be your first waffle. There have definitely been things about that have been hard, but I mean, I'm really grateful that we have the relationship that we do now, where we can like unpack these things and talk about them in a healthy way. So thanks for supporting me.
Always. I always will. I love you so much.
I love you too.